Order, order. Good morning, everybody, and a very happy new year to you all. And welcome to this, the first evening session of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. We return this morning to our inquiry on reforming the water sector, and we are joined this morning by representatives from South East Water and then from the Drinking Water Inspectorate. Good morning, you're very welcome. We appreciate your attendance and your cooperation with our inquiry. Can I just ask you, for the benefit of those who are following our proceedings and for our own official record, to state your name and your occupations?
Yep, sure. I'm David Hinton. I'm the CEO of South East Water.
Good morning. I'm Tanya Sephton. I'm the Customer Services Director at South East Water.
Well, good morning. David, can I start with you? As Chief Executive of South East Water, you've been in that role, I think, since 2021. What sort of company do you want to run at South East Water? You know, we talk about corporate culture. What is the corporate culture that you want your leadership to create in South East Water?
May I say, just quickly start with an apology to the customers of Tunbridge Wells, first of all. I know how really inconvenient it is to not have water. It really disrupts everyday life on every level. And I know it's severely impacted them, and I'd really like to get that on record, that apology. And also, if I may, just a really quick thank you to the Resilience Forum that helped us out. The local MP as well, the staff and the supply chain. They really helped us out in this event. So the company I want to run is, I believe, is the company I do run. It's a really community-based company. It's got history in its community. I'll come into, when we talk about some of the resilience challenges later, about how that sort of community feel comes through and how it's almost inbuilt in our infrastructure. Lots of small companies that have been put together. People live and work in the area. We understand the area. We're not a big company. We've got 2.3 million customers, just over 1,000 employees. So we're not a big company. We don't do sewage. We're just a water-only company, very much focused on the water delivery. And the culture of the company is very much about wholesome, constant water supply, even given the challenges that we've been facing in the South East recently in terms of climate change and others, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But that is the company that I really think I do manage, and I would very much like to continue to manage.
Do you think your customers at the beginning of December would have recognised that characterisation?
We have not performed as we should, particularly in some of our areas that are on the ends of our system or in the isolated parts of our system. If I might provide a little bit of context, because I think it may help the committee as we go through this hearing, so I've already mentioned we're a water-only company. We've got 2.3 million customers. We operate two distinct geographical regions. We call them
at the risk of being rude, we appreciate the fullness of the answer, but we're pressed for time here. Sure. So if we maybe just keep to stuff that we don't already know. Sure,
okay. I mean, the resilience issues and what's been facing us and what's impacted the customers has really been started in 2021. We had an uptick in demand following COVID. We are a commuter-based area, and a lot of our customers are spending a lot more time at home, and there was lifestyle changes, and we've had some really extreme weather events over that period between 2021 and 2025. And that's meant the resilience of these particular areas have been stretched, and you know, we've been doing a lot since. We've got lots and lots of small treatment works, which are all community-based. Just to give you a feel, we've actually got almost the same number of treatment works as Thames, and on every other measure they're 10 times our size. So we've got lots of small treatment works supplying local communities, and Tunbridge Wells is a classic example of that. It's reliant on one single source. So now, none of the events that have impacted our customers since 2021 have been asset failure related. They've been where we've been able to meet demand with our supply. So it's been stretching our resilience because of that kick-up in demand and because of the kick-up in extreme weather events that we've seen. So that has impacted our ability to deliver the service that we really want to deliver.
Okay. To whom do you consider yourself to be accountable? How important is accountability to you?
I think my ultimate accountability is absolute to the customer. particularly in terms of water quality, and I'm sure we'll come on to that later, but water supply as well. I mean, they are the two top areas of focus, and have been since I've been in post. Since we saw the resilience challenges in 2021, as a business and as an individual, I've been absolutely focused on improving that infrastructure resilience.
Just on this question of accountability, your director of water supply, I think, was questioned by the BBC in the incident and about your own particular position. He said that this was unhelpful. It fundamentally misunderstands the challenges the firm has been facing, not just as a company over the last few years and as an industry. The challenges the industry was facing were far wider than an individual company and an individual people. It doesn't sound to me like a company that was a community-based company is taking responsibility for its own actions. Who signed off that as a line of communication?
I think that line was used in answer to a question about whether I should resign. And so it was in the context of that kind of question. It was, I think the operations director, and I know the operations director was effectively saying that isn't a relevant question for now. And as I'm sure we'll talk through, some of the issues are around how we are regulated and how the investment is provided, and that's what he was alluding to in that answer. I think he's right to do so. There are bigger, wider questions here that are not just about South East Water. I think there's got some real relevance to some industry learning. We are at the tip of the spear on this in terms of the pressures that the South East feels, and I can go into that in detail if you wish me to. But the South East of England is particularly hit with climate change impacts. We've had just continual growth in housing forever, and this has meant demand has got very close to our ability to supply.
It sounds like you're not really in control of your own business then.
No, we work in a regulated industry. So it has been an absolute focus of ours to understand how the regulation can help us. And I'm actually really pleased that the Infrastructure Commission, as it was, and the Independent Water Commission both recognise that we need asset resilience standards in the future, because that is at the fundamental point to this issue, is that the lack of standards has meant we've been unable to effectively drive and convince the regulator of the investment that we actually need. And that has meant that we run, in my mind, far too close in terms of what we've got in the infrastructure.
But to be clear, this incident from the 29th of November to the 12th of December, that wasn't extreme weather related, was it? No, it wasn't entirely. I mean, I can go through the event, but that event is fundamentally down to the fact that we've got a single source of supply for Tunbridge Wells. So you've tolerated a single point of failure? And we don't tolerate, we try and mitigate. So we've done the connection we've done. What we've done since 2020 is we've generated a resilience plan, which we included within our most recent business plan, which had 300 million of resilience investment in it. Part of that resilience investment would have supported, and will support, Tunbridge Wells if it's allowed. It would reduce 22,000 customers from being reliant on a single source, which I think is too many. Right. So that eventually you lifted the boil notice on the 12th of December. We're 3.5 weeks down the road from that. What mark would you give yourself in your company out of 10 for your handling of that incident? So if I could split it into 3 sections, if I may. If you can give yourself the mark out of 10. Well, it's hard to give it a mark out of 10 because there's lots of different facets to it. So the response was by far and away the biggest response we've ever done. And the amount of resources we put on it was by far and away the largest we've ever put. Well, it was probably the biggest failure you've ever had, was it not? In terms of customers impacted, this wasn't the biggest impact of the events we've had over the last 5 years, but it was undoubtedly the largest response because of the investment we put into the response side of it. There are definitely lessons to be learnt on the water quality side, which we've already adopted. But you're not going to give me a mark out of 10? It's really hard on a single number. Well, you've got 10 numbers to choose from. Well, I'd give you 3 numbers, and I'd say 8 out of 10 in terms of response. I'd say 6 out of 10 in terms of
in terms of communications, and I'd say 6 out of 10 in terms of the actual prevention of the event in the first place.
So that would be an A-grade pass when I was at school in response, and a B-grade pass for everything else. How bad would it have to be for you to give yourself a failure?
I would categorise that by saying if we had an event that was caused by something that was very easily anticipated, this wasn't.
Sorry, just on that, you were warned 12 months ago by the Drinking Water Inspectorate about this this treatment plant, do you not? But you didn't see it as foreseeable.
The actual issue that caused this event was a change in the raw water chemistry. So we had a change in the raw water chemistry that we'd not seen in 20 years. It wasn't a failure of the asset, it wasn't a failure of the treatment works per se, it was a change in the water chemistry. So, and relating to the
drink... What was that change?
So it was a change in a number of parameters, pH, alkalinity and conductivity, which meant the coagulant, if I could spend a little bit of time describing what actually happened, is that helpful?
A little bit of time if you can, because, I mean, look, the information, the various accounts that have been put into the public domain of this since it all started have varied greatly. So if you can give us a final, succinct, definitive cause of the failure, then I think that might be helpful.
So Pembury is the treatment works in question. It's a groundwater source, so it takes it from local springs and boreholes. It goes through a relatively simple treatment process. One step is coagulation. That's us adding a chemical, which happens all over the world. It's a well-known water treatment step. That chemical effectively clumps to remove the solids, and then that passes for disinfection. This chemical that we've used there for 20 years stopped performing as it should, and that meant disinfection could potentially be compromised. We didn't know that was the issue initially. We thought it was the coagulant we were using, and therefore that's why it appeared like the story was changing, because in our mind the actual issue was changing as we went through the investigation.
Mr. Hinton, are you not describing what water companies are supposed to do anyway?
I'm describing what actually caused this event. Is actually it was a unexpected failure of the coagulant process, which we didn't initially nail as the issue, because the raw water quality had never changed like it had done in this particular event.
Okay. You've had major water outages in 2022, 2023, 3 times in 2025, most recent one we're talking about here. What's going wrong at South East Water? Why have you allowed this failure to continue?
Actually, this is an infrastructure issue. So if I can just go back to the 2 regions for a second. So the Western region and the Eastern region. The Western region used to be Mid-Southern Water as a company. If that was still a company, that would have the best interruptions performance in the industry. The East has one of the poorest. So it's not, I would say that's a pretty good control to say that actually what's going on is the infrastructure in the East compared to the West.
Who's responsible for the infrastructure?
I'm responsible for getting the infrastructure in the ground, putting a business plan together to get that infrastructure supported. But that happens in price review processes. And this has all started post the last price review. So I've been very focused on this price review to get the investment we need, which is why we put 300 million of investment in for resilience as part of that business planning process.
You've been given multiple warnings by Ofwat and the Drinking Water Inspectorate, but still these failures keep happening. Why is that?
Because the infrastructure needs to be in place.
Right. And you don't see that there's any responsibility for yourself?
No, and we've absolutely begun that journey. So we overspent our last 5-year period by over 100 million because we've begun that journey effectively of putting that infrastructure in place. We've shored up, to use an expression, a number of the areas where the resilience was challenged during these heat waves, areas in Sussex and other areas in Kent. We've got a plan to shore up Tunbridge Wells, which effectively is an extension to a treatment works at a nearby reservoir at Buell, which we're currently debating with the CMA about the need for that investment. That's a really crucial piece of investment for resilience in the South East. That's something we've been fighting with the CMA since we appealed. Something we've never done before as a business, but we are absolutely committed to getting that resilience expenditure because that's the solution to this issue. we need more interconnectivity, we need more storage, and we need more production output. And Buell provides us with a lot of those, as does a number of the other schemes that include in that 300 million.
Now, you touched on this earlier. The local Member of Parliament has called on you to resign. With the benefit of further time for reflection, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, so the way I see this issue is it is one of investment, it's one of regulation, it's one of climate change. And as an organisation and as an individual, I'm absolutely focused on doing this. This has been my strategic focus since 2021. You know, I can hand on heart say I was pretty instrumental in the Infrastructure Commission making the recommendations about resilience standards, which in my mind is the fundamental. So we don't have resilience standards in how you build a water network. In power, if you add houses to the grid, there's an automatic requirement for a new transformer. We don't have any of that in water, and which means as effectively demand increases and houses grow, it's really difficult to make a case to go, I need another treatment works, I need more interconnectivity, and so I've been pushing that as an individual, because that's what drives the investment. It's the investment that should provide the resilience for the customers in Kent and Sussex.
Your evidence is basically that you've been asked to do an impossible job.
No, it's happening. We are starting the investment. We've already done, as I say, 100 million of it, and we've got 200 million via the last price review, and that is already going in the ground. But investment takes time, unfortunately. Planning processes take time. So we have really focused on our actual response capability, knowing that we are at risk until the investment goes in.
So you see, this does come down to the leadership that you give the company, and this is material to the way it is handled. And I asked you about the local Member of Parliament calling for you to resign, and I asked for your reflection on that, because the evidence that we got from him actually in a footnote says that the day after, or the day he called for you to resign, you phoned him in the evening. Is that correct?
Yep.
And he says that you asked me, he says, he asked me how I could sleep at night having, quote, politicised the issue, end quote. Is that correct?
If I can give some context to that conversation, if I may. Is
what I've read to you there correct?
I don't recall the entire
conversation. You said to Mr. Martin.
I don't recall the entire conversation. If I'll give you some context, then
you don't need to recall the entire conversation. Is the quotation that I have read to you a faithful representation?
I honestly don't recall exactly what I said, so I couldn't precisely say those are the words I actually used. But if I can provide some context for that conversation. So Mike Martin and I have met a number of times since he's been in post. We've been to Pembury, we've talked about our investment plans going forward and what we've done in terms of the response. I've been speaking to Mike in the early part of the incident, a matter of hours actually before he made the interview and the request for me to resign. I phoned him because I thought we must have massively dropped the ball. I thought, what have we possibly...
You don't think you had done?
Sorry? No, on something that he hadn't heard about since the call I had earlier with him. I had a call with him either that previous evening or that morning, I forget. But I phoned him and asked him what that issue was, what made him change his mind. He said some things to me, and then I responded to him. It wasn't my finest moment. It was a one-to-one conversation. It wasn't my finest moment, but all I'm prepared to say is the things Mike said to me elicited that kind of response, and I think the rest of it was a private conversation. Okay.
Can I just look at the financial position of South East Water as overall? In 2023, it's reported that South East Water spent more on dividends and servicing debt than on infrastructure investment. Is that correct?
No. So that article was run by the Financial Times.
Financial Times, yeah.
And in a part of a simplification of our financial structure, we transferred a set of monies from one instrument to another. In the parlance of finance, that is called a special dividend. And so the headline technically is correct. None of that money left and went to shareholders. None of that money left and went outside of the business.
If your finances are too complex to be understood by the Financial Times, are they maybe just too complex?
And the article itself actually did reflect that movement in funds. Actually, we sought and gained Ofwat's approval for that removal because it was a simplification of the structure we were trying to achieve. At the time when companies' financial structures were deemed to be too complex, ours is by no means the most complex, but that 125 million transfer was not a dividend.
Now, your salary last year was a base salary of £271,620. Is that correct?
And well, the last reported salary is £400,000, my basic salary.
Right, so that's now up to, that's your base salary?
Yep.
And last year you were paid £115,000 of a bonus, is
yes.
that correct? Would you expect to receive that again next year?
So that's not for me to decide. We have an independent remuneration committee that decides on that. There are different elements to the bonus. For example, health and safety is one element. There's a whole load of the elements on supply, water supply, and I don't expect to get a bonus on any of those elements.
Just to be clear, the drinking water Inspectorate last year urged the company to deliver urgent upgrades to Pembury to avoid contamination of E. coli and Clostridium, because it could pose a danger to human health.
So in the audit you're referring to had a number of recommendations by the DWI and a number of dates. We have completed all of the actions by the dates as we sit here today. There are some actions that are due in a year or two's time, but we are up to speed with all those improvements. Pembury's been refurbished a number of times. It was refurbished in between 2005 to 10 was £8 million was spent on it. And in 2028, we intend to spend another £10 million on Pembury. That's the kind of cycle that treatment works generally go in.
Okay, we're going to move on to look at some questioning now around the causes of the water outage in Tunbridge Wells. Charlie, you're going to lead us into this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if we could look more specifically at the Tunbridge Wells incident. The evidence we've received as a committee suggests there was something of a delay between you being aware of that issue and the Council and Local Resilience Forum being informed. Is that a fair assessment?
At the point we knew customers were going to be impacted supply, then that's the point that we did notify. Yeah. That's the point we did notify. Running a set of infrastructure assets, there's always periods of high and low risk when you have to adapt the network, and we have to make a call about when it's prudent to notify stakeholders that we think this might develop. And I think as soon as we knew customers would be affected, we did move it to that stage.
Did you attempt to fix the issue before that point?
Yes.
Before you went further? And is that a decision taken at the highest level by yourself, or is that taken further down the organisation?
I can expand slightly on the cause. So this co-aggregant I talked about earlier started to kind of like, if you like, misbehave on the Wednesday of the week. Now that isn't, we do have that on coagulation, and we change things like pH dose and the amount of coagulation. We do that. So we were doing that normal business as usual. It was when it was on Saturday when we realised everything we'd normally try hadn't worked. And that's when we realised that there was inevitable customer impact, and that's when we notified the local resilience forums at that point there.
And it's quite a jump from going to realising there's a sort of issue and you're trying to solve it to a sort of total outage across Tunbridge Wells. That seems to be quite a sudden escalation. Is that fair?
No, I don't think so. I think we have to make a call about not notifying stakeholders too often and then standing them down, and notify them when we think it's a fairly certain likelihood. And that's a call we always have to make. And in hindsight, I don't think we made the call at the wrong point. I think we engaged the local resilience forum relatively early, because it was over the weekend, and we contacted them over the weekend when this actually started to manifest into an event.
And during that process, did you try and restart the process multiple times? And it failed each time, and therefore you reached a point where you had to then escalate that and obviously inform customers. In terms of obviously the previous risk notice, we've talked about your investment already, your plans. Was there something in hindsight you could have done sooner to improve the Pembury site to have avoided this incident?
Absolutely, in hindsight. So the water chemistry at Pembury it's groundwater. It's normally very constant. It changed. And we've never seen that in 20 years. In hindsight, I wish we'd had the alternative coagulant on site. So we tried loads of different chemicals to see if they work, or they're all used across the industry. We took industry advice about this thing was happening. It's unusual. It's really unusual. We took expert advice from process scientists all over the country, and everything was pointing us to changing the coagulant. So we did that over a number of days to try and get that to work. Now, if we'd have had the alternative on site, which we now have, we could have just flipped it and there would be no impact on customers at all. But we were running with a single coagulant, which I think, in hindsight, is something we won't do at this site or any other site that's like it.
Can you explain to the layman the sort of why that change in water quality may have occurred and so unexpected?
Well, we got one main theory. Is so the groundwater goes into a small service reservoir. It's not very big. It's almost like you call it. It's a pond size. It's not a reservoir size. And it was at the lowest it's ever been at because of the really hot summer and the dry spring since 1850 something, and the really hot and dry summer meant that was quite low. Now chemistry changes at different depths, so it could be and we are still doing loads of experiments to see if this is actually the issue. It could be that we were taking water from the lowest ends of the pond that we've never taken it before, and that's what's changed the water chemistry.
Fair enough. And obviously, Pembury remains this sort of single point of failure. Can you assure the committee there was no other alternative that could have been used at this point? There wasn't any other interconnected system that could have relieved the issue in Tunbridge Wells? No.
What we do is when we see an area at risk, we try and reduce that area. So we put customers onto other supply areas where that's available. So we started with 24,000 customers in Tunbridge Wells, and we could only go down to 22. We can only take 2,000 customers off the Tunbridge Wells area. As I mentioned already, one thing we are absolutely committed to get invested in and funded is the expansion of the Buell treatment works. So on Buell Reservoir, many of you locals will know that reservoir, and that has the capacity to entirely supply Tunbridge Wells without Pembury running, which is what resilience really means, is there's an alternative way of providing water to a group of customers. And coming back to the resilience standard again, I believe the UK should have a resilience standard which no customer, less than say 10,000 customers should be reliant on a single treatment works or single asset. That exists in many other parts of the country, just from the history. In the southeast it doesn't exist, and doesn't exist in some of the other companies in the southeast either, just from a historic perspective. So that's really important.
And that's something obviously you're looking to rectify through your investment going forward.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we've been starting that already.
Yeah, and something that you will, in terms of a timeline, to be able to put people into a position of better resilience.
So the Buell project, if funded, we'd like to crack on with straight away. We're already at Buell doing some work, and that decision is currently with the CMA at the moment. And so 2028, I think, is the date when that will be finished. And that is pretty quick investment, infrastructure investment delivery on the scope of things. So it's a large treatment work upgrade, but that is the kind of speed that we're looking to try and get the assets in the ground for.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Joel.
Until then?
We are trying to, the steps we can put in place is, so number one is this water quality event, with what we put in place, shouldn't happen again. Customers who rely on a single asset still face a higher risk than those that aren't. And that is, I'm afraid, inevitable until we fix this issue of having a more defined set of infrastructure standards and infrastructure across the industry. We are doing lots of other pieces as well. So we've got 200 million of already funded money to put extra connectivity into Kent, extra storage in Kent, and some of this will definitely help Tunbridge Wells. It won't mean it's not able to be supplied entirely by a different asset, though. That won't happen until the Buell scheme is invested in.
You see, Mr. Hinton, I would have more sympathy for this line of reasoning if this had come out a clear blue sky, but it didn't, did it? There was repeated failures down the years, up to and including the warnings from the Drinking Water Inspectorate last year about Pembury. Essentially, it looks to me like your procurement, your quality control, your contingency arrangements at that site were just not adequate. Is that not the case?
No, as I said,
you think they were adequate?
There was no asset failure. None of the assets failed. All the assets did what they were supposed to do. All the monitors did what they were supposed to do. In hindsight, we wish we'd had another alternative chemical that we could have switched to and not taken 3 days to get to that position. That is an absolute learning. And that learning effectively, we were, if I look back on it and sort of go, because the previous 20 years that site had worked with that chemical, we assumed it would continue to work with that chemical. Climate change is changing the environment. In hindsight, we'll look at that and go, we should have had a backup for that particular chemical, even though it hadn't failed for 20 years running with the same one. So that's my hindsight view, is a contingency on some of those other elements. We've got contingency on lots of our assets, but not necessarily on the chemical dosing element at Pembury.
So, I'm reminded of the old line here, the operation was a success, but the patient died. Is that essentially what you're telling your customers today?
No, I'm deeply sorry to the customers. As I said at the beginning, I think it's a terrible outcome, but I guess what I'm just trying to do is explain the circumstances by which it happened, and we have got a number of learnings across the response, across the comms and across the treatment that we are absolutely committed to putting in place. I'm not trying to say that it wasn't a failure, it was a failure, but I'm just trying to help the committee to understand how that came about and explain that from that point of view.
Okay, we're going to move on to look at the incident response in some detail. Jane, you're going to lead our questioning here, and then some from Henry.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for coming. So I used to live in Tunbridge Wells in a previous life, so I know the area a little bit from a long time ago. The Borough Council told us that it took a day for the bottled water station to be opened, and that it was in Tunbridge, which I know is a different town and actually quite difficult to get to from Tunbridge Wells. And following complaints about that, there were some further bottled water stations opened at the cinemas and the RCP car park. But those, I believe, 2 are out of town, so it was a struggle for some people to get there. And we've had reports from the MP of mothers with young children saying they simply couldn't get to the bottled water station. So it doesn't seem to have been the best way of doing it. So could you explain why those sites were chosen, why it took so long, how many pallets of the water were originally put out and how many were used?
Okay, I'll just start by dealing with the first point, and then I'm going to hand over to Tanya on the response piece. So as we went through the event, initially we thought we were going to lose only a portion of Tunbridge Wells. So I won't go into the hydraulics, but there is a situation by which only part of the town goes without water, not the main town, and that's where we thought we were originally, which is why we put the original bottled water station at Tunbridge.
Which isn't Tunbridge Wells.
No, and then also because we were mobilising on a Saturday, we have in the Tunbridge Wells area, we have 17 sites pre-selected, and we'll choose between those depending on the size of the event. So some of them are like parish car parks, so that'll be for a smaller event. And obviously the larger ones we'd need for this particular event, it was a Saturday before Christmas, so all the car parks had cars in. So we had to effectively select one that at least had access. So that's how it evolved through the process. Then we moved, and I'll let Tanya provide a bit more detail, if I may, on the rest.
Yeah, so if I just to kind of give you the context, on the Saturday were aware that there were going to be some customers starting to lose supply Saturday afternoon. So we mobilised the Tunbridge site, as you've referenced, and that was because of the pre-selected sites not being available of sufficient size for us to mobilise quickly Saturday evening. So we did open Tunbridge, acknowledging that it wasn't ideal from a location perspective, so we continued to scope locations that would be available to open Sunday. On Sunday we opened 3 larger sites around Tunbridge Wells, that collectively over the event distributed 1.6 million litres of water across those 3 sites. They're not immediately in town, as you'll recognise. It's difficult to have a large site in the middle of Tunbridge Wells. We have to make sure when we mobilise a bottled water station it has access for deliveries, for the Arctic lorries to go in there, and it is safe for public and our staff to operate in and out movement of cars and vehicles.
So how long did it take for the first walkable within Tunbridge Wells, the first walk-in water station to be opened?
Well, the 3 larger stations opened Sunday, and then we worked with Tunbridge Wells Borough Council, who were able to operate some smaller local walk-in sites within the town centre that we supplied the water for.
The council had to do it. How long did that take?
I don't have the dates to hand in terms of those walk-in stations.
But it's important to say is we also operate a priority services register where customers who couldn't collect, so basically, there was no restriction on who could apply for that. So it was basically if you didn't have a car or there's no other way of collecting, you could apply and join that priority service register, and then we'll deliver.
I was coming on to that about the vulnerable households and how you identified them. So did they have to come to you? How did you work out who was vulnerable and needed that delivery?
We have what we call a priority services register that customers will be pre-registered to, and they will have registered with us and identified that they were unable to collect water if there was an outage. So we will have a pre-selected list of customers. We'll draw that list down when we know what area is impacted, and we'll be able to...
Did they have to apply to go on that, or was that people on social tariffs? How did you check people weren't left off that?
So we always have a process, a kind of a promotional process, an awareness issue that the industry's got in terms of PSR, the Priority Services Register, and awareness that there's support available. We have quite a high level of awareness in the industry compared to other companies, but there's always going to be a number of customers during an outage that won't have pre-identified with us because they might be transitional needs, they might be a temporary change of circumstances. So we always have a reactive process. We have a dedicated customer care team that have a separate telephone line that they can contact. We work with the LRF to share data on who they're aware is vulnerable at that point in time. And we also have sort of a reactive list that will come through just through our general contact centre or through some of our stakeholders. Those, what we call reactive additional vulnerable customers, will get added to our distribution list for deliveries of bottled water. They commenced on the Saturday.
So you said there were 5,000 customers who were vulnerable on this list. So how many of those had to wait more than 12 hours for that water supply?
Of the total PSR that you've referenced, 100. On our reconciliation after the event, we've identified around 100 customers who didn't get a bottled water delivery within 24 hours. So we're working through with them, and we've engaged with some of those customers since the event. Some of them contacted us, some of them didn't, and we're just working through.
That's the problem, isn't it? Because some of them just won't be able to.
Some have confirmed to us that they were out of area. Some have had support from relatives, and some have had sort of collected themselves. Actually, they were able to in that situation.
And the other thing that came up was that when water was delivered, sometimes, considering these were vulnerable people, elderly people, ill people, that having kind of a 12-kilogram pack of, say, big bottles of water stuck on their doorstep, they couldn't access that. Is that something, obviously, that you need to consider for next time? I mean, how come that happened?
Absolutely, something that's a learning from this event. So when we do the deliveries, we did up to 5,000 deliveries a day. Some of those deliveries, because of the timing and the volume, were delivered out of what we call sociable hours. So the delivery team will not knock the door, they will leave it on the doorstep. We became aware that there were some isolated issues of customers not being physically able to collect it off the doorstep, or it being taken from the doorstep before they were aware it was there. As soon as we became aware of those issues, we re-delivered straight away to make sure they had the water, and we took it in. One of the learnings for us, and I think for the industry in terms of the kind of the needs that we register, we'll collect a kind of a flag to say yes, they need a delivery, but I think what we need to be is a bit more sophisticated in terms of the capability of that delivery and what it needs to be taken inside rather than not left outside.
Yeah, and in a way that people can lift it and people can open it and people can use it as well. To go back to the water stations, there were problems, I understand, with them being overcrowded, closing early, people struggling to get into them, them being accessible. What have you learnt from that about the water stations that you picked and how they were manned and run?
So I think overall across the period that the stations operated well. On the first day we had some delivery issues that meant we had to shut down and restock for a couple of hours at one of the sites. And one of the other sites had to close early because the delivery wasn't going to arrive in time to restock it before its closure time. So we did have a few issues on that first day.
It's so important, isn't it, in an incident like this, that you have a clockwork plan that can't fail like this.
Yep, and from that point onwards, they ran smoothly, were stocked all day, every day, and didn't run out. And we recognise that there's issues around congestion sometimes, particularly at busy Christmas periods, which is why the selection of those sites is crucial in terms of understanding the scale and the volume and the traffic. So I think, yes, there was issues on the first day, but from that point onwards, they ran smoothly.
Something else that Borough Council told us is that the centre of town was kind of pretty much left to them. So they were providing the toilets and the bottled water around the town centre. I mean, that's quite a big gap. How did that happen?
So when we plan for the events and we look at the locations as part of the kind of the emergency planning procedures, we look to have a number of sites to serve a number of customers. As I said, smaller sites within the town centre would only serve a number of customers and would not have been sufficient enough for us to deliver the volume we needed to deliver. We always work in events with the local resilience forum, and there is this partnership of the local authorities supporting, and they provided the support in terms of those local
Was that
areas.
planned in advance, though? Did they know they were going to be doing that? Because that's an emergency response that needs to be planned, isn't it?
It is part of our discussions that we've had with local authorities in other areas before events in the past, and part of our learning in terms of, on the back of previous events, is we have been engaged with local authorities, which is part of the pre-agreed site list that we've got for those areas.
Had that happened in Tunbridge Wells?
We had a list of pre-agreed sites, and we had that agreement in place. But as we've mentioned, some of them weren't suitable for the scale of the event that we had to run. There is some work to do post this event with the Kent Resilience Forum to work through those learnings and what we can do to work closely in partnership with the local resilience forums going forward.
We've read about some really quite sad situations about people struggling with dialysis not working, with medical interventions needed because people were unable to receive dialysis, people who had bowel cancer struggling, who were incontinent, who were left without water. Now, some of those care homes, the dialysis centre, the doctors, the dentists, the nurseries, said that they had repeated failures. They couldn't get hold of that water when they needed it, with the Kent Fire and Rescue Service having to step in and support delivery. Now, do you think, looking back, that those hospitals, care homes and some of those critical services did get suitable support? Was that resilient enough? What would you do in future?
So in terms of the hospitals, our kind of priority when we have an outage is what we call our tier 1 customers, and they are hospitals. The 2 hospitals in Tunbridge Wells were immediately transferred onto their pre-agreed emergency plans on the Saturday, so they move on to a tankard supply, and they remained on that tankard supply throughout the event so they could continue to operate. So that is always one of the first steps we take. The next sort of step from there is then those care settings, the care homes.
What happened to the dialysis centre?
The dialysis centre also had pallets of water provided. When we had the previous event in the area, we had discussions with the dialysis centre to be able to keep them on a continuous supply. They need to have what we call a tanker injection point fitted. They as yet have not had that fitted, but that would have meant they could have kept on a permanent supply of water via tanker. So the next
sounds like they didn't get water for a period of time, because some of these things could only have happened if they hadn't
definitely
had
got
water.
pallets of water delivered. I'd have to come back to you on what day that arrived.
Okay, so
as did the care homes. They all
you were
started
moving
to
on
get
to the
deliveries.
care homes.
So we've got 19 care homes in the area, and they started to get deliveries of bottled water at the first day. Then we moved into a phase where we could see this was going to be going on a bit longer with the boil water notice. We set up a dedicated team that was just focused on what we call our non-household kind of vulnerable customers, including care homes, surgeries, dentists, childcare nurseries, schools. and they had a dedicated team to contact when they needed deliveries and we would check in with them to make sure they had enough stock.
You ended up having to use the fire service because you just didn't have capacity?
Well, initially the priority, as I say, is the hospital with the tank supplies, getting the bottled water stations up and running and delivering to our priority services customers that had pre-registered with us. That next phase is care homes. There were some delays in the early days, but they all got a delivery of water.
And my last question is about the statutory compensation. Now, I may have got this wrong. I was just reading the papers earlier, and it said that on the 8th of December, so afterwards, some of those customers were offered £50 advance credit. Do you think that's sufficient, given the impact of the outage?
So if I could just clarify, there's a statutory compensation process that we've run since the event finished. What that article's referring to is when we implemented the boil water notice and after the outage, and something that we've kind of engaged with customers on the back of previous events is there is a financial impact of having to travel to a bottled water station and to the extra energy costs of boiling water for customers. We recognised that early in terms of the event, and what we did was apply an advance credit to all of the customers that are on one of our financial support tariffs. So those financially vulnerable customers got that payment midway through the event so that if they had any immediate expenditure, they could have some extra funding.
Could they have used that money, for example, to travel to a bottled water station, or would that have gone just to onto their credit on their bill?
So the only means we have to transfer the money to the customers is put it onto their water account, and then they can call us to ask for it to be paid into a bank account of their choice.
Oh, right, so it'd be a bit more complicated than that. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Can I just touch on the local resilience forum, Mr. Hinton? Because there have been lots of previous instances that's happened. So if you look back to 2022, I think you've had 3,000 properties in Tunbridge Wells were affected water supply for 4 to 5 days. 2023, June, you had thousands of customers across various different locations out of water for a week. You've had your local MPs in June in 2022, which is the then MP Greg Clark, talk about a lack of leadership, operations and communications in respect of a void with well-rehearsed plans. And I think Nusgani described it in 2023 as Groundhog Day. So in the context of what your colleagues just described, in terms of you needing to do more work with the local resilience forums and you're relying on the fire and rescue service to deliver water to your customers, what needs to happen for you to learn lessons and to actually provide the relevant support that your customers need in situations like this?
So if I can take you back to one of the first events you mentioned. So as a business, we hadn't faced any major events up until about 2020, and once we started to see these events, we've done a lot in terms of response. We owned one tanker, which wasn't uncommon for a water company. So
you were just unlucky then, in terms of your timing as being CEO.
Well, it is what it is. I started when I started. We had one tanker. We've now got 12. We had no dedicated alternative water supply resource within the business because it wasn't used. We've now got over 20 employees that just do that. We've increased the amount of stored water we've got. We've increased the amount of bowsers we've got. We've done so much in terms of the response. We've got a team dedicated to the vulnerable non-households. We've got contracts in place. We mobilised over 100 people on this event. We got nowhere near that resource on any of the previous events. In the absence of the infrastructure being in place, we have focused our resource on the response and the response capability. None of those assets and none of those resources existed in any of those previous events. They've all been put in the last 2 to 3 years. The tankers arriving last year, and those tankers moved something like 2 million litres of water around the company during that period. That resource was not available to us. We also used the supply chain, and at one point we had well over 20 tankers working on the event. Those kind of resources were not available. That's the learning we've been able to put in place early. That's the learning we put in place for this event. It didn't stop the customers again. In fact, and that's the bit, that is That is our goal. But what we've done is to keep customers, and they didn't stop that, and I'm forever regretful of that, and again apologise for that. But we have done an enormous amount on the response capability of South East Water as we went through those different events.
I mean, why is there such a disconnect between what you've been putting out and what the local council have been sending in correspondence to this committee? Why has there been this sort of disconnect between what the customers are experiencing on the front line and what the local MP has been submitting to this committee and what the evidence that you're giving today?
Well, we're given a full picture of evidence after going through the whole event. Many of the comments were made very early on in the event, in the first 2 days, when we had some teething issues with the sites. We were trying to put a site out within 24 hours notice of the event starting. And that initial period is really difficult, particularly over Christmas weekend, to generate those bottled water stations, for example. It didn't take us long at all to get into the swing of things. And I think it was over like 400 hours that the bottled water stations were open, somewhere in that area. And we only had about 2 hours of total downtime in that 400 hours. So we've got the full picture of what the event, because we've got that information. It's inevitable that customers who experience a substandard service, and I hate it when anyone does, speaks to the local authority, and that becomes a picture for the event. But it's not a total picture of the event. To understand the full picture of the event, we need to look, as Tanya's very carefully outlined, the sort of number of things. We're doing 5,000 PSR deliveries a day, and some would have gone wrong, and I hate that, but that's still a pretty substantial resource effort. Again, I would rather not be doing it, but I'm just trying to provide the context of the full event, and there are unfortunate case studies which indicate it didn't work 100% all the time. But on the large, on sort of the large look, it functioned much better than at any previous event in the past.
Well, can I just explore with you then the chronology around the setting up of the bottle stations? So, go back to the Sunday the 30th. You had a conversation with the local MP at that stage where you were pressed to extend from the Tunbridge site to set up a number across Tunbridge Wells. And you suggested at that point that you would have one in the Pembury Tesco. Is that correct? Did you set that up? Tanya, do you know?
Yeah, so I can answer that. So the Tesco site was a pre-arranged, pre-scoped site. We've used it in the past.
Notwithstanding the fact that you'd been told by Greg Clark, the previous MP, that was not a suitable site.
At that time, we inquired about using it because it had been used before, and they're having refurbishment work, and they said we weren't able to use that site, which is where we then moved to other sites on the list.
Right. So then you moved to, let me get this right, because these are not places that I know, the Knights Park location and the St John's Leisure Centre. And there was a problem. You went to St John's Leisure Centre first, is that right?
I'd have to check that. Sports Centre.
That caused some difficulties with traffic management.
Yes, there were some initial traffic issues at the Sports Centre site when we opened Sunday morning.
And then the Knights Park location, and that was your 3 sites.
I'd have to check the naming. I've got Sports Centre, the RCP car park, and Odeon Cinema.
Okay.
Sites.
And you had problems with the sites that you had pre-identified because they were set up in car parks which were used for people parking cars. Forgive me if I'm being obtuse, but was that not somewhat foreseeable?
Because I said that. So we have 17 pre-arranged sites, and we're not going to use all 17 at once. They're very much scenario-based. So a small burst would be a parish, etc., etc. Equally, we've got 17 because we also realise different times of the week, different times of the day, different times of the year, they're going to be used differently. So when we went through the 17 initially on the Saturdays, as soon as we went through it, it became clear that we wouldn't be able to set them up till Sunday, which is what we ended up doing. So we wanted to set something up so customers could go somewhere to get bottled water. the most obvious, evident place was the one we chose. It wasn't ideal, absolutely.
You wanted to set something up.
We needed to set
this
a couple.
Doesn't exactly sound like a strategic approach.
Well, to have a completely, the alternative is you have completely open areas of sets of land all over the region, which you can just use only for that purpose, and that would definitely not be in an area that would be accessible to Tunbridge Wells customers. So we choose existing infrastructure. And I have to thank those sites, actually, by the way, for letting us onto those, because they don't have to letting us onto those sites, because it provided, as Tanya said, the safe flow through traffic. And I visited a number of these over the week, and it was well set up. The customers were very complimentary of how it's provided.
I mean, given the performance of South East Water, are we going to get to the point where you do actually have sites that are just permanently set up for providing emergency supply?
Hopefully they'll not be needed if we get the infrastructure that we need to put in place.
Can I look at the question of the Priority Services Register then? It's been suggested to us that in fact the information in the Priority Services Register was not complete and accurate and up to date. Is that correct?
We go through a process where we revalidate the Priority Services Register with customers every 2 years.
It was suggested to us that in fact there were people who had been previously on the register on a temporary basis who were no longer requiring to be on the priority services but were still getting it in any event. Is that correct?
There may be customers in that scenario.
Okay. We also heard that actually nobody was answering the South East Water telephone line to receive water deliveries, so people then turned to the Member of Parliament's office. Were people not able to get through in the water line?
They were able to get through, so we had a high volume of calls, so the wait times were longer than we would like. On the Sunday, our average wait time was 18 minutes. We were getting through the calls. Everyone who requested a delivery of bottled water that was added reactively to the list received it within 24 hours. We can confirm that as part of the reconciliation.
Did you not in fact end up using the MP's office as a clearinghouse for people to be added to the Priority Services Register?
As I mentioned earlier, whenever there is an outage, there are always a number of customers that will come through a stakeholder or another channel rather than come to us directly, and they will always be processed in the same way at whatever channel they come into us.
I'm told it was 160 vulnerable people who had delivery requests passed through the MP's office. Surely your telephone service was just not adequate. In one particular day, we had over 600 reactive requests come through. Some of those came through the MP channel, as you've referenced, and the majority came through our phone channels. 160 did not, though?
No, they came through stakeholders.
Just to be clear, Mr Hinton, you gave yourself an 8 out of 10 for response earlier. Is this an 8 out of 10 response?
I can't say why the customers contacted the MP, but we had an 18...
They're saying that it was because you wouldn't answer the phone.
Well, we had an 18-minute wait time, as Tanya said, at the peak. So an 18-minute wait is too long, but had they tried to continue with that route, they would have received bottled water via the company.
Can I also pick up one other point there? I think I heard you correctly earlier in saying that you'd had no incidents before 2020. Was there not a bad outage in 2018?
That was the freeze-thaw outage, Beast from the East, and I think that impacted the whole industry pretty much. And so
off what note at that stage say that customers had been badly let down?
I believe they might have said that, yeah.
They might have said that. Okay, we'll move on to a question around communications and compensation. Sarah, you're going to lead us on this.
Thank you, Chair. Morning. David, before you took up senior leadership roles at South East Water, what was your professional background?
So I'm a biotechnologist by training, so I've worked as a microbiologist at various different laboratories, including the Public Health Laboratory Service, and then I've been largely employed by South East Water in its different forms for 26 years. Mm-hmm. My latter part of my career has been in economic regulation and in environmental regulation and in water resource planning.
So when this crisis hit back in December, what was your first port of call? What did you do?
Well, So as CEO in an incident, we very much have, our emergency plan we've got roles. So I'm effectively on the gold team, and my role is to liaise. We're not a big company, so some other companies, but we're not a big company, so I'm on every instant call. So that's 3 or 4 times a day, understanding the issue. I then update the board, stakeholders, regulators, and I'm the sort of the external face with all the different stakeholders on that issue. I'm also making sure there's enough resource to deal with the issue, any procurement resource that needs to be signed off. I'm largely involved in it, and this one was slightly different because this was a water quality issue, of which I did also add, I think, some personal expertise into trying to solve the issue as well. So I did get involved in the ground. You
got involved in
I did a bit, yeah.
The scientific element of the role. Is there not enough people in the organisation to do that element?
We're only 1,200 people. The water quality team, process science, is about 7, 8. And I could have said, no, I'm going to leave that to them, but it is an area I do have some expertise. I spent a lot of time at Pembury. We needed to solve.
You didn't think your team had enough expertise in that, and you felt that you had to oversee that element?
We're the sort of company where if you've got expertise, you would help.
Okay, but there's of scientists that are doing that. There's only one chief executive in the organisation. You've been criticised for not being visible in a CEO role, and there's only one of you doing that role, and not communicating with consumers about the developing situation. Why did you choose to take that approach and not be the public-facing person of the organisation as a chief executive? It seems that you battened down and went to your comfort zone as a scientist.
Well, I went to the heart of the issue, but to actually answer your question,
is not the heart.
Solving the issue for the customers was my priority. So if you can answer the question, so when we run an event, what we're trying to do for customers is give them information about what caused the event. Do they need to worry? Are there any risks? And how we help to resolve the event. And that's the key communication messages.
You've got a team of scientists to do that. You didn't need to get stuck into that.
So in terms of the external communication question, so we used what we call the right people at the right time. So we had Tanya early on as customer impact. Then we went operations director and our senior scientist to talk about those issues. I then went at the end of the process did a number of media interviews to explain the whole process.
What date?
It was past the end of the process.
Why did you choose not to do any media during the incident?
That's what I was getting to. So what I've found recently, so I've done a number of interviews on events and various issues in my career, but what I've found recently is when I do an interview, those 3 things that we're trying to get across to customers don't get put across to customers. I get asked about all the other CEO questions. So I'm very happy to do that, but in the right time in the event, because during the event, we want customers to understand the risks. I get asked about what you might imagine. I get asked about dividends, salary, etc. And that isn't the key message we want delivered to customers during the event. I'm very happy to take those at any other time, but not during the event.
Okay. So there seems to be a period of time during the incident where there was simply no communication coming from South East Water. And certainly a consistent voice during the crisis. And various different executives were being put up, which didn't really inspire confidence. There wasn't a clear narrative around their media engagements. And I just feel that for you not being part of that, when your customers wanted to see you out there being visible, being the focus of the organisation, why was that? Why wasn't there clear communication from the outset? And why was there a number of different spokespeople being put up with confusing messages being put out to the public?
I'll ask Tanya to add a bit on how much we actually did with the media and whether we had a gap on communications. But in terms of the clarity of the communications, the story did, in our own mind, as well as in the communications, change throughout this event. So we initially thought it was a batch of chemicals, and that's what we originally communicated. It then moved, and so unfortunately...
You authorised that statement on the bad batch?
I'm sure I did. I authorised all the statements, ultimately, that went out on the press. So the story...
I'm sure that you did.
I am pretty or the director on call if it had been at the weekend. So it's
later disproved, as we know. Why did you authorise that?
What was later disproved? Sorry,
bad batch of chemicals.
That was it. When we initially went with the press release, that's what we thought. So the treatment works stopped functioning, as I mentioned earlier to an earlier question, on the middle of the previous week. And the thing that had changed that week is we'd taken another batch of chemicals. So the classic scientific question is, things have happened, they've changed. What actually has changed in the process? It hasn't done this before. So the batch of chemicals was delivered on the Wednesday. So our working assumption was that batch of chemicals wasn't functioning as it normally does. So we then effectively went through that communication journey. So we said this is what's happening. We were trying to give customers, and we've been criticised for not giving enough detail in the past, some idea of what we thought was causing it at the time it was causing it. And that story, unfortunately, changed in our own mind, and therefore the communication started to be now completely understand how they would sound. If you heard the communications, it felt like we didn't have a handle on the issue, which in reality, in terms of what was causing it, we didn't for the first 3 days. We didn't have a complete definite answer on what would solve it for the first 2 to 3 days. And that really hampered our ability to communicate. In terms of the volume of communication...
So with various different channels that we use throughout the event. So every day on the back of each instant call, we would send out a stakeholder update, a customer text message, which is a new system we implemented on the back of the last event at Tunbridge Wells. So across the event, we sent over 1 million text messages to customers. Every day we're sending out multiple stakeholder emails and media statements of 150 throughout the event, 40 stakeholder emails. We did 15 media interviews. So coverage-wise, there was a lot of communications going out. The messaging, I understand, because of those changing explanations and those changing resolution times, it was frustrating and confusing for customers initially.
There's a lot of misinformation that was going out, wasn't there during that time? And correct me if I'm wrong, but the first time that a spokesperson was put up was on the 4th of December. That's a significant. That's 6 days into the crisis.
We did media statements on the Saturday and Sunday on day 1 and 2. Myself and a colleague did media interviews on the Monday morning and on Monday afternoon. So they started.
A number of different people were being put up.
Depending on the news channel and depending on the subject.
Right. Do you not think that one individual, one key spokesperson, perhaps the chief executive, would have been a better person to put up for those interviews?
Well, as David said, our approach is always the right person for at the right time. At that point, we wanted to get the kind of public health, the service message across, so therefore it was the water supply director and myself that were putting the message out there.
Some of that information that was being put up was over-optimistic about the timeframes for restarting the water supply, and this was done over a number of consecutive days, and then there was messages relating to the boil notices that were unclear as well. Why was this messaging around the water supply not clearer, timely, and more accurate?
So we know from previous events the kind of customers have said to us they want to know a resolution time so they can make their own arrangements when there is an outage. So we were very much aiming to provide a resolution time, and we were providing that time based on the best available information we had at that point. So at the weekend we had a new batch of the chemical coming in Sunday morning. We expected that to work because that had worked in the past. We expected the site to be back up and running and customers to come back into supply on the Monday. So the resolution time reflected those expectations. As it became clear as we went into Monday and Tuesday that those resolutions weren't working, and even though some customers had come back on, some, 14,000 were still off, and we needed to take further steps. We had to move that resolution time as we were trying the different chemicals, as we were trying to get the site back up and running and stable.
It's interesting that your early communication suggests that the restoration would come back by 2 p.m. on the 1st of December, but when your internal logs showed insufficient storage. Why was that?
So as we put the new chemical in on the Sunday morning, we expected the site to be back up and running Sunday afternoon. Once that had gone in, it took longer to stabilise that treatment process, and the site wasn't back up and running until sort of middle of the night, Sunday night, which meant that the resolution time was pushed further forward because the storage levels hadn't got up to the required level to turn the pumps back on.
Just turning to water delivery, that's done by a contractor, is that correct?
The vulnerable customer deliveries.
Yeah.
It's a combination. We've got an in-house customer care team that do some of the deliveries, and then depending on the scale, as we have a contract resource.
When the contractor was out, what kind of information that was being fed back to you? Because I understand that the information that was being fed back to you actually wasn't what was the reality on the ground. Who did you have out on the ground to deal with the strategic overview of the water?
In terms of the water deliveries, that's our own in-house customer care team who supplement the contracted resource. So they're out there doing the deliveries as well as our contracted resource.
Looking back on that now, do you feel that process was smooth and accurate information was being processed through?
I do, yes. So we were getting different, we were getting feedback directly from our customer care team that were making those deliveries, that those deliveries were very welcomed by customers. Across the event, we've made nearly 39,000 deliveries to customers, and we do get feedback from them, and we have engaged with some of those customers after the event. And we've got feedback from them already that it was, they really appreciated getting the water.
I've heard that the MP's office team were out on the ground feeding that information back because there wasn't the correct information going back and there wasn't the storage of water that was necessary, and sites were running out, and also local councillors were very much involved on the ground. So thanks to them, perhaps some further disasters were stopped. Why didn't you have that level of control on the ground, and it took other stakeholders to participate in that to get the right information back to you?
Well, we were getting the right information. We have reports back in from each of the bottled water stations, from all stakeholders as well as our own teams that are on the ground. So we have teams on the ground on the bottled water stations, teams doing the deliveries. We have technical teams out in the network, and we get feedback from all of those channels through an event, and we will correlate that feedback to make sure that we understand what's going on in the field.
Would you say that your crisis comms and your crisis management has been flawed in this incident?
I think it's always tricky in an event to kind of meet the expectations at the same time as dealing with a complex situation. So there's definitely learnings to take away. But we've learned from previous events that
have already said, excuse me for butting in, but the committee have already said there's been a number of incidents over the course of many years now. Surely lessons should have been learnt during those incidents. Why are we still in a situation here?
The lessons were learnt. So the text messaging system I referenced earlier, we didn't have that in the previous event. So we got feedback from customers in that area last time that said there wasn't sufficient methods of communication, the frequency of the communication wasn't sufficient, and the clarity of the communication and the empathy wasn't there. This time round, we had a text messaging system that we didn't have before, and we sent over 1 million text messages to customers in that area. So the sufficiency of communication, we've had feedback to say that those updates were welcomed. I think the clarity of the communication is challenging when it becomes an evolving situation where we did set an expectation of resolution that sadly we were not able to meet, and I think because of that then the communication is poorly perceived. But the frequency and the kind of the content and the tone of those communications have improved since previous events.
We've had a number of different elements of correspondence from businesses, individuals. One local resident said the biggest thing for him was the communication from the water company. Every 12 hours, you kept updating, saying we're expecting this to be fixed within 12 hours, and then it went on and it went on. These are people who want a water supply, they're expecting a water supply, they're getting different notifications about boil notice, so there isn't an issue, but yet still boil your water. What's going on here? Why wasn't there that clarity for individuals? And the number of businesses that were affected is extraordinary, particularly, as you rightly said, it's the week before Christmas. A lot of these businesses had Christmas parties booked, and the amount of distress that it's caused them has been significant. What have you got to say about that?
So first of all, we're sincerely sorry for the distress that it's caused to any of the customers in Tunbridge Wells and the impact on any of those businesses. In terms of the messaging, what we've learnt through this event is that whilst we were striving to give a resolution time, because customers had told us they want to have resolution time, we need to be more transparent in terms of what is required to be delivered and to be successful to meet that expectation. I think that would have provided a bit more clarity for customers to then understand when that time moved, to understand why it had moved. And it wasn't because we didn't know, it was because something hadn't worked that we expected to work.
So an improvement in your crisis comms is required then?
And on that point, Jenny, you have some questions on crisis comms.
Thank you, Chair. David, I'm actually quite shocked about what I'm hearing today. The scale of this, the impact on the number of people it had an impact on, and in truth, the lack of accountability that you're taking today to address some of those issues or to recognise some of those issues. I'm actually genuinely quite shocked by somebody that used to work in communications and crisis communications. Your rehearsed answer at the beginning, I'm sure, will be welcomed. Was that the first apology you've given, personally?
No, I think on the media interviews I did, I am deeply apologetic, and I gave on those interviews as well. As a business, and the culture of my business is a small community feel to it. We absolutely hate it when customers don't have water. It's like we're failing in our primary job, and so we really feel it. We have many of our customers, staff live in Tunbridge Wells, so it's deeply felt. It's really deeply felt, and the accountability point is, absolutely accountability for it, but the fix, I'm going to say it again, is an infrastructure fix. So I'll go back to the West, which we also manage with the same people. It would be the best performing company if it was still an individual company in terms of interruptions. The difference between the two areas is an infrastructure difference we absolutely need to solve. And now that has been my strategic priority, and that's where I think my accountability lies, is getting this infrastructure in for the South East Water customers, because that's really where the resilience gets delivered from.
So I understand that. It's infrastructure failed, but what I think we're trying to say, what I'm certainly trying to say, is you let people down on a human level with your response. On the ground, total failure of communications throughout that period as well. So yes, infrastructure fails. We accept that. Things are always going to happen in every industry, in every organisation. Infrastructure will fail. We know that. But it's a human response. It's the empathetic response. And I think if I can ask you to take anything away from this entire process, you have to address that. Infrastructure will continue to fail in the future, and I hope that your investment plans will seek to address some of that, but it's the human response that's fundamentally lacking in this. There's only two things I want to point out, and that really shocked me today. Your response to the local MP on the phone when you said, "How do you sleep at night making this political?" And he's not even the same party as me. And I haven't been able to get over that sentence sitting here today. Do you think we're making this political? Do you think this is a political...
No. There was two parts to the conversation. I'm not proud of how I reacted. It was in the middle of the event, but it was a private conversation. And what was said to me at the beginning part of that conversation elicited a response that has been quoted. But it was a private conversation. And I'm happy if we can leave it at that. Can I just pick up on the human response piece? We are super conscious of the impact on the individual customer. Now, the PSR piece we do, we go above what we're required to do on the PSR piece. GP surgeries, etc., are not part of any of our statutory duty to do. We did those because we saw the need. Giving the £50 extra because there's a hardship, because we knew the boil water impact's not part of any statutory duty. We did that because of the human feeling we saw happen. Also, we're also really conscious of when the event happened, and we've got 15 days to make GSS payments, the compensation payments to customers. We made those first day available, because we were conscious of the cash flow impacts on small businesses in Tunbridge Wells. So we're not just effectively a business driven by regulation. We think about the customer first, and that is one of the big culture pieces, is that if we do the right thing by people, then we should be doing the right thing by regulation. And so all those little steps, they all come from internally in the team. We need to do this for these people. We need to do that for these people. But all a very human response. We missed some customers, and we didn't deliver to some customers, and I hate that. But we didn't miss anyone who phoned up and asked us to deliver it. We delivered it as soon as they told us this.
Yeah.
And so it was I felt it was a very, very human response.
So I think, just to be really clear, I'm sure there are many of your staff at South East that did a great job, that went out above and beyond, and probably worked weekends, worked longer hours, and probably don't enjoy big salaries like yourself. And I'm sure, and I don't mean a criticism to them, I have no doubt they went above and beyond. But this is I'm talking about the leadership here, the leadership of the organisation, and the need to lean into it. And I'll go on to my second question now. You said earlier about the crisis comms response statements being signed off. You said you were pretty sure it was you, unless it was at the weekend, and then it would have been direct on call.
Yeah.
You earned £500,000 last year. Why the hell were you not working at the weekend during a crisis?
Well, as it developed, I was. But Tanya was the director on call at the weekend. So as such, it's just process, right? So the director on call signs off the press releases on that process. I was on the call to Tanya all the time. I was on the call to Mike Martin over the weekend as well. I just couldn't hand on heart say I've signed off every single press release because of that caveat.
You understand, Mr. Hinton, that when we come back to this conversation with Mike Martin, it's not about personalising it between yourself and Mike. It's about the possibility that tells us something about your capacity to give leadership in a crisis.
I mean,
does that reflect your capacity to give leadership in a crisis?
I don't think it does. My leadership in the crisis was, I was sleeves rolled up in the middle of all the events. Well, like I keep saying, we're not a very big company. We're only 1,200 people.
But you get paid £400,000 a year. I do,
and as I said before, that's not something I decide. That's a remuneration committee who looks at market prices and etc. I don't decide that particular salary. But I roll my sleeves up and get stuck in. I know this business inside out. I know the regulation of the industry inside out. All my staff will tell you I'm absolutely dedicated to get the infrastructure issues fixed, to get the resilience issues fixed. That is where my heart and soul lie. It is on fixing this issue. Absolutely hate it on an individual level.
For what it's worth, I believe every single word of that, but it doesn't necessarily make you a corporate leader, does it?
It's one of the attributes. You've got to believe in what you're doing. You've absolutely got to believe in what you're trying to achieve. In fact, I'd say it's quite a high one. And the other one I'd say is my staff are behind me on it, because they absolutely are. And we are absolutely as one in trying to get this issue solved. And that is definitely another leadership trait.
We're going to move on and look at the impact on business and some of the compensation issues here. Tim, you're going to lead our question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Hinton, what do you understand the impact to have been on local businesses caused by this outage?
Well, clearly, having no water for a number of the businesses will have a huge impact on their ability to do what they normally do. Restaurants and service businesses, etc., particularly at busy Christmas time, would have had an horrendous impact. I don't deny.
Do you have a sense of the financial impact it then had? Can you put a figure on it?
No. We've had estimates of different, and we're in the process actually of going through some of the kind of like what we think the impact might be internally. We have allocated £600,000 as an extra piece on top of the compensation, which was in total 16.5 million across both household and non-household, particularly aimed at those customers who had an impact are unlikely to be insured for this particular issue. It's the UK utility model. In fact, it's not just the UK. That the compensation for loss of utility is about the loss of the service, not the loss of the value to the business.
Can we just stick to the impact to business for a moment then? So you've got various estimates. We've heard from the Business Improvement District and the Council that it's up to £20 million is the financial impact on businesses. Is that your understanding? Is that a ballpark figure that you
recognise? No, I don't recognise that number.
You don't recognise that number. So do you have your own number then?
No, we're in the process of looking at that, and that's part of our allocation of the 600,000 to small businesses.
At the moment, you don't recognise the council's figure, you don't recognise the Business Improvement District's figure. How many businesses were impacted? I was looking at the GSS numbers and I couldn't quite understand. Do you know how many businesses
were
impacted?
We've got that figure.
Yeah, so there was 1,514 what we call non-households, so businesses that were impacted. Of those, of the 1,500, around 75% of them have the equivalent consumption of a domestic household. So they might be a kind of a low water user, like a shop with a toilet and a sink. And they will range from retail shops to office buildings to kind of local authority sites like sports centres.
Yeah, we've seen evidence of a fishmonger who lost £7,000 in stock alone, a nursery where they lost £16,000, which is the cost of 2 free places for a disadvantaged child to attend for a year. So can you come back then to the compensation you're providing? You haven't worked out what the impact is on business, but you've already arrived at a figure for compensation?
Yes, so we've, as David mentioned, our total compensation package comes to £16.5 million.
We're just sticking to businesses.
Yeah, so 95% of those impacted were domestic customers, so the lion's share of that compensation pot goes to the domestic customers.
How much is
so
that?
The business compensation is 1.9 million, and that follows our what we call our guaranteed standards of service scheme,
the GSS regulations.
The GSS regulations. Yeah. Which were positively sort of strengthened and refreshed last year by government. Following quite outdated values. So the business's compensation package is 1.9 million. We've made a number of steps to make sure that is kind of doesn't stick purely to the regulations, in the sense that we have some modelling data that suggests some of those businesses at times might have had water restored because it's a gravity-fed system, but we've just taken a blanket approach to say when it was off and came back on. And we also have within the regulations opportunity to cap based on the annual water charges, but we haven't applied any caps to either businesses or households through this process. And then the additional step on top of that is the fund, the hardship fund that David's mentioned.
600,000. So you don't know what the impact is on businesses, or certainly don't recognise the figure provided by the local authority, but you've already arrived at a compensation figure.
Compensation figure is derived by the application of the GSS regulations.
You don't intend to go beyond the GSS and the additional 600,000. Do you think that's fair? What
the GSS regulations set out, what our
wasn't my question. My question
are,
was, do you think it's fair to local businesses?
Based on the value of the compensation the average business receives, and based on the fact that 75% of them use the equivalent of a domestic household, that's 4 years free water in effect. Now,
I appreciate that. That wasn't my question, though. Do you think it's fair? I mean, the evidence we've got is that potentially 32% of businesses say their survival is threatened by what happened.
Yeah, and we're really sorry for that impact. The expectation is, as we set out, and the GSS regulations aren't designed to cover financial loss as a result of loss of water service or power or flooding on those businesses. There is an expectation, industry, that businesses will have insurance that will cover those losses.
Well, we might come back to whether that's a reasonable assumption to make in a moment. Mr. Hinton, do you think it's fair, when footfall fell 50% in the town centre, that the compensation you're offering is adequate?
I think the fairness question is one of a policy around setting GSS regulations. So they're very much designed to do what they do: loss of service, not loss of value. And that is a kind of ultimately legislative regulatory decision about how that works. We're not funded. I'm not just talking about us. I'm talking about all utilities for that kind of insurable loss coverage, which is effectively what you're referring to. Which is, I know it's horrible for customers to go through that impact, but that is a much bigger question than just South East Water. That is effectively covering insurable losses via a utility progress. So it's not just us, it's broadband, gas, electricity, all with the same model. The non-insurable losses are not paid for by those utilities.
I mean, there'll be businesses that think that you're hiding behind the GSS regulations, but you've clearly made a determination that GSS isn't sufficient because you've added a discretionary 600,000.
That's our people point. We've done this before. So on occasion we recognise things like it's Christmas. The GSS regulations don't recognise it's Christmas. So what discretion have we got? We don't cap it at 2 years annual bill. We had 600,000.
Your discretion is unfettered, isn't it? You can make any...
No, but it's nevertheless, we're making a discretional... We are stepping into a lab. We don't need to.
You've got the discretion to make whatever you deem is appropriate or the company
Yeah, we've got discretion to make an infinite amount. But, as a business, we're not... No, that is not the model that all utilities in the UK
That
operate.
goes back to my question then. Do you think it's fair then, bearing in mind the losses seem to be up to £20 million, that you're offering 2.5 million?
And this isn't for me to decide in this. This is not this. We are operating within a regulatory regime, a legislative framework that has decided this is the way utilities should effectively pay compensation to customers.
As a community company, community-based company, you don't have a view on what is fair. Fairness is not something you find in the GSS regulations.
No, so if you take, so we're a business, we operate within the same framework as everyone else. One of the big events we talked about earlier, 21-22, was the Storm Eunice event. So the Storm Eunice event cost us something in the region of £8 million because we lost power. We lost power to the whole of Sussex, and we paid our customers in those instances GSS payments, and we paid penalties and fines. But we had no redress with the power network that caused that power failure. And it's just, so businesses in this, and actually we weren't totally insurable on it either. So it is a UK model, and I don't decide fairness on the UK level, it's not above my pay grade. That, you know, so, and many are insured, so no, I think that's also covered off like that.
I'm not sure they are insured. I mean, the stats are not as clear as they perhaps should be, but there's an Aviva survey that says that 62% of SMEs aren't insured. Mm-hmm. There's a YouGov survey that says that only 21% of small businesses have a plan. Understandably, because this is a utility everybody depends on to work without failure, in all honesty. I mean, would you, and I would strongly encourage you to give a positive response, would you consider a scheme at least for small businesses if they were able to evidence their losses?
I mean, and that's exactly what that fund is for. That 600,000 is for those who can evidence the losses.
That's a fraction of the amount.
We don't know, do we? So that scheme is yet to be administered. It's yet to be decided how it be allocated, and we're working with local authority colleagues on how to do that. And so, businesses are very welcome to ask whoever ends up. We don't think it's right for us to do it. Although we will be involved, to allocate that expenditure out to customers.
If there are claims beyond the 600,000, will you entertain reimbursing companies for those losses?
We'll look at the evidence before us, absolutely.
Okay, I'm not sure that's going to give a great deal of comfort to small business owners. But
I mean, does this come to the crux of your evidence today? You're just determined not to admit liability for anything because you know there's going to be a cost attached to it?
No, that's not the case at all. So this is very much a framework question. The compensation utilities is very much a framework question.
It's, as Tim has just said, it's a fairness question.
Yeah.
And you've accepted the principle by your 660,000 ex gratia payment that this is not an adequate figure. But frankly, it's beads to the natives, isn't it?
Sorry.
The offers that you are making to these businesses, and it's all sorts of businesses. You've been told about the hospitality businesses. I've got one letter here from a high-end jewellery store that explains the very substantial loss that is caused to them because people weren't coming into the town centre anymore, and all as a consequence of your failure to handle this outage properly.
And I really fully understand that impact on business customers. And
you just don't think you have any liability to pay for it?
The model of the UK utility model is as...
You're hiding behind the model, are you not?
I'm not hiding behind the model. We have gone above and beyond what we need to pay across all of the GSS compensation. So we haven't just done GSS, we've done discretionary on top of GSS. There's a number of caveats we could have done. And in terms of the running of the incident, we ran it. We put all the resources we possibly could. Cost has never been a question.
And for the first 3 days, you didn't have any idea what was actually causing it.
We had a running theory about what was causing it, which was then informing our resolution times. Mm. That running theory proved to be the actual cause, just not quite the way we saw the remedy occurring.
See, the thing is, if any of these businesses were to take legal action against you, you would defend it, wouldn't you? And you would get the best quality lawyers in their small businesses, so there would be no equality of arms here, would there be? You can just sit there
I've never considered that question.
Hide behind the GSS regulations.
I'm not hiding behind the GSS regulation being put in place by government for this very...
We're running well over time, but I don't think there's anything that we can miss. Juliet, you're going to ask some questions around future preparedness.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Hinton, in 2023, South East Water was found to be the worst performer for supply interruptions in the country. These figures show that no water was available on average for more than 3 hours per year, against the company's own commitment to bring it down to less than 6 minutes. Parts of East Sussex region are still officially in drought, and it's the only water company in the country where customers are still facing a hosepipe ban. Currently, Ofwat's carrying out an enforcement investigation into South East Water's supply resilience. Taking all those things into account, can the residents of Tunbridge Wells and other South East Water areas expect further outages in the future?
So there's a number of points. There. So if I pick up the drought question, so the drought question is
my question was around: can the residents of Tunbridge Wells expect further outages?
We hope not, but as I've said before, it's an infrastructure solution. So we're doing everything we can with the infrastructure we have. But the real key to supplying resilience to Tunbridge Wells, which is a single source of supply town, is the extra investment that we were needing at the Buell Water Treatment Works down the road in Kent. That is the real fundamental change that we absolutely need. In terms of drought, and it's a related but not related issue, is that there's very sophisticated mechanisms in the UK for actually managing the amount of raw water we've got, and that's where drought gets decided. So how much raw water has the country got? Different drought triggers. As I go back to, there's no infrastructure standards that actually run how you run the network. How much storage should you have? How big your treatment work should be, and how much
given all of the outages that happened in Tunbridge Wells, what measurable actions are being taken now to prevent those reoccurrences?
So the main one is the ability to use a different coagulant. Going back to that issue, that's absolutely going to effectively mean that any change in the future raw water will be able to cope with. We're adding additional treatment as well, an extra filtration step that isn't necessary, but is an extra piece of belt and braces treatment process on the end of the treatment works as well, as an extra resilience. And those two things will mean that Pembrey still remains a single source of supply, and that is in itself a risk. But those two mitigants mean the likelihood of this event reoccurring will be really low.
Okay. I've got another couple of questions for you. So talk us through what proportion of the PR24 settlement has been allocated to resilience upgrades, so with specific plans in mind.
So resilience was our key theme in the investment plan that we put in at PR24. If you read our business plan, it's almost the headline strapline, is we need resilience in Sussex and Kent. So in our original business plan, we put in 300 million of necessary resilience, which is in effect bigger treatment works, more storage tanks, so treated water storage tanks, not raw water reservoirs, and interconnectivity with mains. So we want to be able to move water, like from Buell to Tunbridge Wells. That kind of movement was in the plan. Ofwat ended up funding 60% of that 300 million. And we've now, because we need it all, it's absolutely essential, and I go back to my sort of mission, we've taken that determination to appeal at the CMA, and they've now funded more of it in their provisional determination, but we are still striving for that 300 million. I think it's absolutely essential that the infrastructure is in place. It's infrastructure that solves this issue.
Okay. And how do you think that those upgrades that you've spoken about will materially reduce their outage likelihood within 6, 12, 24 months?
So infrastructure takes a while to put in place. So we will concentrate, as we have done on all of our sources, which are single sources, trying to stop the source from failing as a primary after that period, so 27, 28, on the Buell scheme. when you have two treatment works supplying a single group of customers, that group of customers can only be affected when both treatment works fail at the same time. So the odds of that happening are astronomically lower than they are if it's one single works. So it disproportionately improves resilience when you have an alternative water source to the same group of customers.
Okay. So do you think that the improvements that are in place are enough?
The ones we've got planned, and if all funded, are definitely enough. We've spent a number of years refining those plans and ensuring that resilience is in place.
And my final question to you is, will you commit to publishing a verifiable resilience plan so
Yes.
that everybody's absolutely clear?
Absolutely. We've got resilience plans for every part of our business. That formed the underlying investment requirement we put into our business plan. They were built on regional area resilience plans, and the Tunbridge Wells one is part of the Kent one. And very much that's how we've built up the investment in the first instance.
And do you have a time frame for that plan?
So actually the resilience plan goes over 5 years, but it goes much longer than that because we anticipate climate change impacts going forward.
Is there one in there already, or are you going to do one?
We've got a plan in place, and we've started the investment.
When does that end?
2030. All the schemes are finished by 2030 within the current 5-year plan.
It's a new one then?
Yeah. So 2024, we created a resilience plan, went into our business plan at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Terry, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up quickly the point about future preparedness, because I think actually anybody watching this, particularly that live in your area that you serve, will be particularly worried about the future. And it seems to me that the risk assessment process worked because the evidence is clear that you internally as a company, you were fully aware of the risks, and external organisations flagged concerns as well. So the risks were known, but the risk management process was clearly inadequate because despite there being a high likelihood of risk, the preparedness was poor. I mean, I was quite surprised by pre-approved sites not being available or not being suitable, for example, with the drinking water. And the comms strategy clearly did not meet the occasion on this particular incident. So you've spoke about what you're going to do in terms of future resilience planning. Could you perhaps try to seek to reassure us? Because how are we as a committee, or more to the point, your customers, going to have any confidence in your ability to deliver that resilience plan? What's going to be different?
Well, this resilience plan is about infrastructure, and the industry and South East Water are well versed in delivering infrastructure. We've been delivering millions of infrastructure over many years. We've just built a treatment works actually in another part of Kent, about to go live in Aylesford. So that's a huge piece of investment we just finished. We just started Broad Oak, which is a new reservoir, much needed in Kent. So we are very versed in delivering this infrastructure, and it's very much now a priority of our business is to now put this resilience infrastructure in place as soon as we can. As soon as we can, within the planning constraints of the UK, which do sometimes delay stuff, but massively within in the focus of the business is to get this infrastructure, as we call it, in the ground.
Okay. Henry?
After everything that we've just heard, right, the fundamental point for your customers is that there's going to be a 38% rise in their bills. And so by 2030, it's going to be about £339 after inflation. So in that context, perspective, your performance, your company's performance, the people that are picking up the tab are your customers. Does that sit well with you?
That increase you've referenced is effectively the increase to drive that investment. It's the increase to drive the investment in the infrastructure in the South East, which has been underfunded for decades.
Well, why do you think it's been under? I mean, you touched on this at the beginning, though, right? But you've spent more on dividends and servicing debt over the previous 2 years from 2023 than investing in the infrastructure. The numbers are you paid 156 million in dividends, paid 72.8 million in interest, while servicing 1.4 billion pounds in debt. And you, in terms of that's more than what you've been spending on your infrastructure. So there's been clear financial mismanagement. And again, the people that are picking up the tab are your customers.
The dividend point I answered earlier, it's not a dividend. The shareholder's taken no dividend for 5 years and doesn't intend to take any further dividend for the next 5 years. So zero dividend left the business to go to the ultimate shareholder?
It's not for now, but it would be helpful for the committee to understand, that instrument, whether it went into another holding company, and also if your shareholders are providing funding, what they're charging you for that funding as well.
We can certainly provide that, but then we've no dividends left the business to go to the ultimate shareholder.
But there might be a perception that your shareholders are charging you what might be considered a very profitable rate of return on the funding they're providing you.
So, sorry,
we await your correspondence with interest.
Right, yes, we will follow that up with correspondence. Mr Hinton, I suspect we could probably carry this on all day, but we have other business in Parliament. So, for the moment, thank you for your evidence to the committee today, and we shall doubtless return to this at some point. We do have a further witness to bring this morning, so I'm not going to suspend proceedings. If we can have a swift changeover at the front of the room, and we thank you for your attendance today.
Thank you.
Just remind my colleagues that their microphones remain live.
Did I say we might not finish this?
Okay.
We won't know. My.
Right, Marcus.
Morning.
Good morning, Marcus, and apologies for the delay in getting to you. Just for the benefit of our official record and for those following our proceedings, can I invite you to give us your name and your occupation, please?
Yeah, so I'm Marcus Rink. I'm the Chief Inspector of Drinking Water. I have been so since July 2015, and my responsibility covers England and Wales.
Right, and look, I repeat the apology. I'm not great at keeping to time at the best of times, but look, behind you there are people from the community that have been affected, businesses and private individuals, and quite honestly, I just don't have it within me to leave questions unasked for their benefit, given what they have been through. Before we come to the questioning of this, what did you make of that?
That's a really good question.
Well, just tell us.
I was disappointed.
Yeah.
For someone who's worked for decades within the water industry and as a regulator for more than 2 decades, I was seriously disappointed, and I think it's a real shame that this has occurred, and it leaves a black mark on the water industry.
Just academic interest here. What was it that disappointed you most? Was it the failure to accept responsibility, or was it the failure to treat businesses and customers fairly?
Well, look, drinking water is central to society. It's a primary objective. Customers quite rightly expect drinking water to be provided all the time at the appropriate quality, at top quality. We pride ourselves in this country for producing top quality water. We lead the world, and we shouldn't have a member of the team letting us down or their customers.
Right. Look, we do have questions which we have considered ahead of Europeans here today, and we will push on with these as fast as we can. I would hope that we would conclude proceedings perhaps by past, if that's not too inconvenient for yourself.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Or indeed looking around the tables from my colleagues. Henry, can I invite you to lead off, please, in relation to reforms to the drinking water regulation?
Thank you, Chair. I think we'll just start with the elephant in the room, which is that government said it's going to abolish the Drinking Water Inspectorate and create a new integrated water regulator. So I just wanted to ask what the sort of challenges and opportunities from your perspective this represents for future drinking water regulations.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably worth understanding that the Drinking Water Inspectorate is quite unique in the world. We were created in 1990 on the back of some serious incidents within the water industry, most notably the Camelford incident in 1988. You can look back on Hansard, and in 1989 the creation of DWI was debated as a solution to prevent incidents such as that happening again. In that year, in 1988, we saw both Camelford and Cryptosporidium in Swindon, which were some of the largest seminal moments within the water industry. We are an organisation that's been copied. Certainly, you can look at, as an example, in New Zealand after the event where there was 3 deaths. The judicial inquiry that followed on from that also felt that there should be a chief inspector of drinking water, and since then they have created one. So there is something about having a highly specialist team, which we are. We are specialists in respect of academic and industry specialists. Most of us come from the industry, so we are poachers turned gamekeepers, and that's hugely important. And that is a skill which has made us remarkably successful over the last 3 decades, in so much as reducing the number of incidents. Sadly, we still have incidents, but also increasing our water quality to a world-leading level of water quality. Just thinking about if we go forward, obviously the proposal is to have a unitary authority, or dare I say, sorry, a unitary regulator. I correct myself in that respect. We feel that the recommendations of Sir John Cunliffe were strong. I'm eternally grateful within his... I am very grateful that he recognised DWI as being a supremely excellent regulator among what was and is a difficult industry and a difficult regulatory set. He therefore recognised that there should be a number of things that we need to take forward in terms of maintaining the identity of DWI, in securing the Chief Inspector, and I would fully support that. Some of the risks, I would argue, would be, for instance, the loss of the DWI identity, the excellence, the agility that we have, our effective organisation and expertise. If we go into a very large body, the fact that we're quite small, we're so expertise and we're so specialist allows us to be very agile and have experts who need to respond to such instances we've been talking about this morning in South East Water. Nevertheless, there are some advantages. There are clear tensions between the regulators, between Ofwat, EA and ourselves. So, for instance, the abstractions licensing by EA for water resources can have a severe impact within drinking water resources, and that in turn can have an impact upon the water company supplying water. So, for instance, we have Duxford, where changes in water sources licensing impacted the abstraction, and that resulted in the changing risks associated with PFAS, for instance. We see changes in licensing arrangements within South East London, for instance, which will impact the resilience of London, driving some of the requirements for the larger treatment works to supply more people. So the advantages really would be that if we have an integrated regulator, we can look at the source to tap, tap to sink, sink to sea. and then work out the whole water resources management from abstraction to treatment to delivery. And that would allow us to align our water safety and sufficiency planning and our long-term planning with the water resources management planning, because we may well have some influence within that, notwithstanding we follow the recommendation of Sir John to have parity of DWI within the new regulator. It wouldn't serve a purpose if DWI didn't have a tripartite or quadripartite stake within the new regulator, because, as we can see, drinking water quality is people's highest priority. And if we don't have that equal standing, then the issue would be that there would be a loss of what is really important. The other thing, of course, is that that closer working relationship with the financial regulator. For instance, we deal with not just drinking water, but we deal with cyber security as well. And we're responsible for security and emergency management. So that's the emergency response under the direction of SEMD, which brings into play alternative supplies and the duty set upon the company to risk assess and respond appropriately. The examples we've seen this morning were far from excellent, and did follow on recommendations of an audit of ours in April 2024, which focused on the inadequacy of the preparations of the company following incidents in 2023, 2022, 2018. And in fact, I counted 20 incidents since the beginning of 2022, which were due to loss of supply. As we can see, there is increasing challenges in cybersecurity as well, and that allows us to have a more direct influence in some of the strategic long-term systematic planning of the industry, because we believe in our long-term planning guidance that actually you should plan for 10, 20, 30, 40 years for future generations. And in that respect, if we have a greater influence within the over the business planning, then we can help that through. We can also lend our expertise to perhaps guide where companies are perhaps putting things in their business plan which is not valid or is valid. Perhaps we can bring some credibility, our values and culture in that. I would like to bring our credibility. We're seen throughout the world, nationally and internationally, as a highly credible organisation, one that's copied and one that's listened to on an international stage. I think we would probably benefit from the extra resourcing. We're a very, very small organisation, less than 60. When you compare us to, for instance, Ofwat hired more than double the number of staff DW has in its entirety in the last year alone, for instance. So for us, that would help with our resourcing, which has been quite challenging. Hopefully also that brings with it trust, transparency. One of the issues around regulation is that people no longer trust regulation and regulators. They don't see us as being trustworthy. I completely understand that. That needs to be fixed. Maybe we can help with that. And one of the things I'd like to think is that we're an evidence-based regulator, so we can bring evidence-based regulation. Now, when you look at Sir John's recommendations, he talks about supervisory control, and we work a supervisory system, so we use a system of risk assessment, water safety planning. We use risk assessment methodology, and we set the guidelines for companies to work within, which is a supervisory model. It's not a supervisor, it's about setting the model by which companies work within. A constrained discretion, I think, was the word Sir John used, which allows us to think about how what are those tram lines. In fact, we have a metric that uses tram lines, physically uses tram lines in recommendations, so we understand what the behaviour of the company is. And the expertise of our inspectors, I'm indebted to the highly qualified inspectors that I have, who, as a leader I leave them to their discretion. And I wait for what they say to me and recommend. So yesterday, I spent a good hour listening to what my inspectors were saying about South East Water and what their expert opinion was about that incident. And it was grim listening. The point about a leader is recognising the capability of your staff, what expertise they have, and being able to listen to what they're telling you and take that leadership role so that people feel that they have the they're both motivated, but they feel that they can make decisions on their own. And when you're dealing with highly educated, academically educated individuals, you have to allow them that space to create that motivation.
Can I pick up on two things that you've just
Please do.
Gone through? And thank you for that. It's very helpful. One point is around the drinking quality of the water in England is very high, and assuming into a new regulator, there could be a fear that focus gets lost and one that's consumed with bills and pollution. Is that something that you think about?
Yes, I mean, it is my greatest concern, because when you're talking about, for instance, the E, where you're talking maybe 10,000 people, where you're talking nearly 500 or 600 people from Ofwat, and when you're talking about 60 people from DWI, you could see how that would disappear within a very large regulator. And that's why we have expressed strongly when I met Sir John that there ought to be a clear understanding that DWI should have equal status. At the moment, we are very much a sub-unit within DEFRA in the water and floods, and that does cause us some challenges. And what I wouldn't like to do is that if we're trying to make this work, because it is about making it work, I truly want to make this work, it's about getting it right from the outset, and that's recognising where the skills are, where the successes are, and how we can make those successes, and how we set the structure of a new regulator in a way that brings those benefits that I've talked about forward.
And the point about transparency as well, which is interesting, I heard you say in your opening remarks. Are you concerned that actually there could be reduced transparency because it all gets done in-house rather than having that sort of more public, potentially discussion between regulators?
Yes and no. I mean, certainly the way that we work as DWI is we publish all our data, water quality data. We publish a report annually. The Chief Inspector is answerable to the Secretary of State in this respect. And we're subject as a government department to freedom of information. So we will provide all the information that we are able to provide, notwithstanding there are certain limitations in that. For instance, if we're dealing with cyber security, we can't obviously deal with that. If we're dealing with a prosecution, obviously we need to follow the rule of law and we can't talk about that. But I think bringing transparency is about the values of leadership. And you have to be, as a leader, accountable to those as a regulator. And we talked this morning, you asked the question to the Chief Executive, are you accountable? Look, if you're a chief anything, you are accountable. And I'm glad to be here to answer the questions that you ask. And therefore, that is about being transparent. And I'd like to bring that into any new regulator.
Thank you. Can I move on to the future risks? So the sort of compliance of risk index, the CRI, and it's going to be tightened over the next 5 years. And Ofwat said that that's going to have significant challenges for operators, which when you think that there are 6 companies that failed to meet their target every year since 2020, maybe that fear is warranted by Ofwat. You've also got issues around climate change and legacy contaminants. What do you think are the biggest risks to drinking water performance, and what do you think the new regulator needs to do in order to address those?
Yeah. Okay, so this is it's a big question, isn't it?
We can break it down.
Yeah.
Let's break it down. With nitrates and extreme weather events, in terms of that making water treatment more expensive.
Yeah.
So do you have an idea about, because that was one of the things that we talked about at length with Southern Water, about South East Water, about how it was all about investment, about the need for investment. That was something he kept coming back to. Do you have a sense, DWI, about how expensive these costs will be for bill payers and whether they can be avoided?
Okay, well, let's go back first to what are the risks, what are the future risks, and then maybe we can talk about some of the follow-on questions there. So look, you're right. I mean, certainly climate change is a major issue for us. The reason is because of the changes in water quality, the raw water quality, which is inherently making it more expensive to treat because it becomes more difficult to treat. The water availability is reducing, and therefore we have to move or potentially move water around. So climate change as a whole will have an impact. There are obviously population challenges, so we do expect an increase in population, and that's increasing the amount of water consumption. And from a water quality point of view, we're starting to, but we have a real clear understanding of new challenges such as perfluorinated chemical substances, which themselves are required to be treated. Now, it's inevitable that as we go through the business planning that there will be a need for companies to start thinking about how they deal with those things through the long-term planning. Inevitably, you would expect there to be a cost associated with that. Now, what I think you would need to do is, rather than try to do everything all at once, all at the same time, so trying to deal with population expansion, climate change, that you do that in a systematic, strategic way over a period of years, so that you have a smooth rise in bills over a period of time, rather than these big, chunky changes in water bills. So do I expect there will be some rises as a result? I would say inevitably, but I think it should be done as a strategic way over maybe 10 or 20 years rather than doing it so quickly.
And what about the risk in respect of the need for speed? So, I mean, if we think about lead pipes, for example, I mean, there was reports that 3 million lead pipes still exist in water companies, and only 4% have been estimated and been replaced in the past year. So that's a sort of health risk to the wider population. You know, if you look at a 10, 15, 20-year infrastructure, that maybe the population don't have time for that.
Time or money. Look, there is a solution for lead. I think 3 or 4 million lead pipes is probably an underestimate in terms of the number of homes. But actually, I think if you look at the housing legislation, what you could do is you could change the housing legislation that on the sale of a house, that if a surveyor would be required to inspect and identify if the house had lead, and if that was the case, then there could be a duty put on the purchaser of the house that was buying it, or the buyer of the house, and that could be put on the mortgage, much the same way as you have a survey and you need to change windows and so on. If the survey identified a lead pipe, then you could put that on the future mortgage. Now, if you did that with the turnover of housing stock over 20, 30, 40 years, you would actually solve the lead problem. It would cost nothing to the administration. It would cost nothing to the water companies. It would only cost the value of that lead pipe to the individuals who were buying the house. That's an easily doable solution. Now, if we had thought about that solution in 1970 when lead was banned, we would have solved the problem by now. Instead, we're 55 years down the line still talking about lead. So I would encourage you to change the housing legislation and say on changeover of ownership. Now, additionally, if you're thinking about landlords who rent properties, they have a duty, don't they, to their tenants. So why wouldn't you turn around to those landlords and say, actually, you have a duty to change those lead pipes for your tenants? And if you do that, actually you would solve the tenanted property as well. Now, that's not costing the administration, nor it's costing the water companies, nor the general public any money to change that lead. So that's entirely possible. Now, going back to the PFAS issue, okay, the water companies aren't the cause of the PFAS issue. It's the industry, or industry who are producing PFAS and who have now polluted the environment. I, as the drinking water inspector from 2005, have had to put a strategy in place to deal with that PFAS. Now, we've done that successfully over the last 2 decades by being able to put in the requirement within companies' business plans to systematically reduce that PFAS. We're one of the leading countries when it comes to making sure PFAS is not in our drinking water, or not at a level that UK HSA considers at a level which you should be concerned about. Now, what we ought to be doing is considering about how we deal with that in the environment and who's polluting the environment. So we ought to be chasing the polluters there. And as a regulator, that's part of a regulator's job. Now, it's not my job at the moment, or may not be the job in the future, who knows. But my job has been to make sure that the drinking water is secure from PFAS, and I've done that.
Do you think there should be bans, stricter standards?
I do, actually. I think, it's an incredibly useful chemical, but I think there ought to be I think there ought to be a consideration what you're using it for. We don't necessarily need to be using it on cardboard food containers or in cosmetics or on materials like flooring or car seats or things like that. So it's everywhere. Okay. Of course you need this useful chemical in medical devices and so on, and one wouldn't turn around. But what you need to do is have a restriction on that. The issue for a regulator here is that you have to be quite careful about what you're restricting. So, for instance, we've restricted PFOS and PFOA. We know PFOA is a dangerous chemical. It's a Category 1 carcinogen by the WHO. The issue is that chemical companies are also quite clever. And what they then do is, if you ban a particular PFAS, they split it down. So you then end up with a new species. So you have to be holistic and you have to be strategic about how you do it. So when I look at the water supply, for instance, when I was looking at the water supply, we were seeing PFOS and PFOA. Now we're starting to see the emergence of PFHXA, which is a newer generation of PFAS, and that is because of chemical engineering, and that creates even more challenges. So, like, for instance, if you had PFOS, you can remove that largely by a GAC. The smaller chains become much more difficult to remove, and that becomes much more expensive. So we need a much better holistic strategy about how we go around that.
Can I just, I'm conscious of time, but in terms of the raw, untreated water, and there being no, you talked about the regulator, and there's no regulations on the safety of pre-treatment water. Is that something that's on your...
It's been on our radar for some time. Yeah. So what we do is we look upstream. Okay, so we may be the drinking water inspectorate, but what we do is we look up at the catchment and we have put into place catchment management requirements and notices for water companies. And we collect the raw water data at the point of abstraction. And we look at that, and that forms our risk understanding of what companies are having to treat. So it's an upstream methodology. Now, part of, I suppose, becoming an integrated regulator would help better with sharing that information. But we do look upstream. So there's no regulation, but we do expect companies to do it under the water safety planning, and they provide us with the data And we have all of that raw data, together with 1.7 million lines of risk data, which we analyse because we work in a proactive methodology to identify risks before they happen. Not all risks, you can't remove all risks. That goes back to your question around CRI. CRI is a risk index.
Yeah.
You can't remove all risk. You get in your car, you drive, 100 miles, you have a risk. There's actually an odds on that you will have some kind of an accident, 1 in 37 times, I believe. Don't quote me on that figure. I think I saw it from a bookie somewhere. But the reality is that you've got to understand that there's always a residual risk. The objective for us is to try and mitigate down that risks.
No. I'm just trying to make a bit of progress. I've just got 2 more questions for you. What you've been saying has been gold dust, so I haven't wanted to. But I'm conscious I've taken half an hour, and the chair is probably giving me eyes. But I'm not trying to avoid looking at him.
I'm enjoying this.
Can I ask quickly about microplastics?
Yes.
In respect of there not being any standards, I appreciate the WHO don't. There's no recommendation for them. But what was, in terms of your organisation, your perspective on that? Quickly.
Great question. Okay, so we carry out lots and lots of research. We've done research on PFAS, we've done research on microplastics, etc. Okay, I'd love to turn around and say I want standards, and I have been driving for an update in the drinking water regulations for some time now. In terms of microplastics, the research that we have identifies that microplastics in raw water, much of it coming off the roads, etc., is well removed by water treatment process. Because if you think about it, water treatment processes are intended to remove particulate matter, okay? Because that's what they're designed to do. So, in fact, we find that a typical water treatment works of filtration, clarification filtration will remove about 99.99% of microplastics. So when water leaves the works, it's actually the number of microplastics is remarkably low. It picks up microplastics in plastic pipes, people's domestic plumbing and so on. But the reality is what risk does that pose? Okay, so one is we know that microplastics is reduced well down in water treatment works. There's no evidence that we can see at the moment, or certainly the WHO indicates, that those microplastics have an impact upon health. Now, we have to be health-based. Now, on one hand, we're precautionary. On another hand, we're health-based. And on a third hand, we're risk-driven. Now, if the evidence indicates that the risk is low, both from a process point of view and from a drinking point of view, then actually you would have to start thinking about the merit of putting an additional requirement for testing. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't test for it. In fact, you might argue that it would be a good thing that there should be some operational testing going on so that we start to understand that. And that was the methodology we started thinking about way back in 2015 when we were thinking about PFAS, because we said we don't know what the question is, first of all, and we don't know how to measure that. We don't know how to measure, for instance, PFAS properly. So we started out by saying, how do we measure it? We commissioned research for it. We then said, now we need to know what the problem is. So we asked companies to do that for us. We collected 1.5 million data points on PFAS over the last 2-3 years. So we have a really good understanding. Now, it might well be that we should turn around and say, well, we need to do a bit more research on this. But we need to prioritise what we see as urgent. And so PFAS took a higher level of urgency for us to understand what the problem was and if there was a problem, and to put that into business plans, whereas the research wasn't indicating the same level of risk associated with microplastics.
That's very helpful. And finally, Chair, can I just quickly, sort of taking a step back from everything, the IWC, the Independent Water Commission, do you think that that work has stalled progress in respect of other changes that could have been made for drinking water, particularly legislative changes?
I mean, that's another great question. Look, it's all about priorities, isn't it? If I had my wish list and my magic wand, I would just say we need an update of our drinking water quality regulations. I would argue that we need to put regulations in for sufficiency. I would argue that we need to have grey water regulations for safe delivery of grey water within domestic and industrial premises. And I would argue that we should have that. And these are all things that I have mentioned, said, written to the Secretary of State about that we should be doing as a regulator from a strategic point of view. Do I recognise that there is a crisis within the water industry and a crisis with regulation? Of course I do as well. I think the Independent Water Commission was an important piece of work. And because of that, it's necessary sometimes to deprioritise other areas. I'd love all of our stuff to be done straight away, but sometimes one has to be realistic about things. So, has it stalled it? Maybe. Is there good reason? Probably. Am I patient? I definitely am.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You wanted to, and then I'll go.
Very quickly, Henry's covered pretty much what you've covered, pretty much all of it. There was just one small thing about the weaknesses in the supply chain. I was reading about the availability of sodium hypochlorite to disinfect drinking water. Do you see the supply chain or the availability of these things in the supply chain as a weakness? Do you think that needs to be strengthened?
Is it?
Do you think that's a weakness? Do you think there is that we're reliant apparently on only one source? Is that a problem?
I mean, look, that's a reality of manufacturing in that something like sodium hypochlorite all goes to one point. That creates a weakness. I think as an administration, there is a real responsibility in protecting what is really important and what the public really values. So from my point of view, if you look at the amount of, for instance, sodium hypochlorite, chlorine, all comes from the same source that the industry use, it's a tiny fraction. It's like 1% of the total chlorine. Same with carbon dioxide, which is used in a tiny fraction. Okay. So what I would suggest that should be done is that there should be clear expectations and legislation around the protection of that supply for the critical service. So whilst I accept your question, which is it critical and is there a risk there? The answer is yes and yes. What do we do about it? Well, actually, we say we need to ring fence that supply.
So that could be considered almost a national security issue then, if it affects our.
I would argue that it should be the highest priority. Now, because the industry doesn't have the purchasing power, when we've dealt with some of the chemical incidents, whether that is chlorine or whether it is, for instance, coagulants, and there have been a few instances in coagulants over the years, and here I mean the supply chain, not the situation with South East Water. That was something completely different. Then what I would argue is that there needs to be ring fencing around these critical supplies for critical infrastructure for what is important to the public.
Thank you.
Okay, my revised timescale is now shot dead in the water as well, but we'll carry on if it's okay with yourself. Terry, you're going to take us back to some of the areas that we've dealt with already this morning.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious of time, but I did want to go back to what I'm sure is on many people's minds this morning, that the point about water emergencies. I'm going to dwell on this morning's session for the rest of the day, I think, to be honest with you.
Why not?
But I think it's fair to say that there are a number of companies that are struggling to prevent supply interruptions and probably struggling to respond quickly to outages. And I think in the role that you do, and you've been doing the role for a while, I'd imagine you have excellent oversight of the industry as a whole. How well do you think the sector prepares for emergencies? How concerned should we be?
Look, I think it differs from company to company. On the whole, I think the water industry does quite well. It's inevitable that there will be events and there will be emergencies. I think the most notable event that I can recall was in 2007 in May when the water treatment was flooded. That was no fault of the water company there, and that took the entire supply of the UK bottled water in 5 days. Okay, so the magnitude of the supply of water, if you compare the sales of bottled water in the UK amount to about, I believe, 6.5 billion litres per year. It's a half a day supply for drinking water. Okay, so the importance of getting it right and being prepared is something that is high on our agenda. And we're responsible for the Security and Emergency Management Measures Direction. That covers both physical security, but it also covers the response to the incidents like we saw this morning, and where alternative supplies are required. So, for instance, we see some companies who are now responding to that by buying quite substantial fleets of tankers, water quality tankers. So we think that the industry is better prepared now than it ever has been. Is there a likelihood that something will happen? Well, of course, things do happen. Will people be out of supply in the future? I would hope not. The realist in me feels there will be. Do I think that all companies are ready for it? No, I don't. Do I think some companies are? Yes, I do.
Okay. So, thinking about those companies that are not ready for it, and I'm pleased to hear there are good practice examples as well. How have you and your organisation worked with those companies that are perhaps not prepared to give advice and support them to plan for those worst case scenarios? What role is it for you to try to get them where we want to be?
Yeah, so we use a risk-based methodology. We use that throughout, whether we're using it cyber security, physical security, emergency supplies, water quality and so on. So our expectation is for companies to carry out a risk assessment. So they carry out a standard RAG assessment, and that covers preparedness, volume of supplies, planning, which should have been part of it, planning for those supplies, exercising those supplies, etc. And they provide that risk assessment to us. What we then do is that we go through a step of verification. Now, my team who deal with SEMD will go out and they will audit the company. So, for instance, South East Water, we audited them in 2024, gave them 5 recommendations in alternative supply on the back of 2022, 2023, 2018, and the 20 other incidents that were associated with it. If where they're not complying, we then have powers under Section 18 of the Water Industry Act. So we put in place enforcement orders, and our expectation is the companies will meet those requirements of the enforcement orders. That doesn't always happen. What we would like to do is we would like to make those sanctions a little stronger around that Section 18. So, for instance, if a company doesn't meet the requirements of a final enforcement order, that requires us to go to court to show that they haven't met that requirement. Now, unfortunately, the court process is quite slow. In some respects, we have a case, for instance, that's 6 years old. So what we would like to try and do is put in civil sanctions associated with those to encourage those companies that are slightly behind the curve, and there are a few, to be up with the leaders in the industry. So it's a combination of what we do, how we verify it, but also there are potential for the future in making those encouragements a little bit more tangible.
Okay, and so you touched upon South East and the Tunbridge Wells incident. I read your 2024 risk notice. There clearly were warnings, as I mentioned in my comments earlier. But what I wasn't clear as to what extent that was followed through. If presumably they weren't all implemented, I wasn't sure if you got to the enforcement notice stage on those specific incidents. So why weren't you able to sort of enforce the necessary changes that you clearly identified with this particular one?
So, I mean, we do rely on companies to take certain actions. And, I mean, the situation in Tunbridge was in Pembury Works was a classic. I mean, if I had lots of time, I'd explain it a little bit more to you. But the reality is it shouldn't have been a surprise. Okay, there was nothing unusual, okay, about this works. There was nothing unusual about the turbidity upstream. There was nothing unusual about the source water. There was nothing unusual about the alkalinity pH. Nothing unusual about the level. In fact, there was absolutely nothing unusual at all. Even the chemical, there was nothing unusual at all about it. So the issue for us is, why did that go wrong? You know, if there was nothing unusual, why did that go wrong? Well, when you think about it and you start to look at it, now remember, my scientists have looked at 1.2 million pieces of systems control data, 50,000 samples, and 1 year's worth of records. We've gone back 2 years in terms of records. In the notice, we ask for the company to carry out jar tests. Now, jar test is a bench type test which says what you do is you test the efficacy of the coagulation to see whether it's worked. And the reason is because you need to optimize that coagulation. Okay, it's really important that you optimize it, because if you have levels of alkalinity and pH, sometimes the coagulant doesn't operate unless you optimize it. Now, part of understanding what that optimization is about doing those jar tests. Now, part of the notice said the company should do those jar tests. The company did 2 jar tests in the last 12 months, the last one in July.
Can I just be clear about this? Mr. Hinton's evidence was that this was something extraordinary and unforeseeable. Just for the benefit of Hansard, you're shaking your head.
Look, I need to be absolutely clear about this. I've had 2 scientists, and we are talking highly qualified scientists, postdoctoral scientists and a process scientist working on this. I spoke with them. We've identified that Pembury Works have been operating suboptimally for weeks and months prior to the event. Okay, there is clear evidence of poor filter performance, inadequate coagulation management, reduced backwash capacity, and reliance on manual interventions, and a lack of online performance visibility to enable a critical assessment and response. They were flying blind. There was no electronic collection of data on coagulation. It was fixed manual dosing, which meant that if the flow of water changed, the dosing remained the same, the concentration changed. Okay, the DAF filters weren't washed adequately. The backwash system was had a passing valve into the dirty wash water tank. From January of the site was shutting down following a GAC wash. As I've said, the chemical dosing wasn't visible on SCADA. The lack of online data for coagulant flow and dose means that there was no way for the site operators to notice or intervene for coagulant dosing injector blockages should they occur. They had no idea. The process scientist responsible for the site wasn't available. They were sick. So there was a stand-in scientist who was working there. The filter performance drops away on DAF filters at various dates. The start of the incident, in the opinion of my inspectors, was the 9th of November.
9th of November?
9th of November. I'll repeat
almost
that.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
Before the actual...
There was a noticeable and cumulative deterioration of all vessels from the 19th of November through into the start of the event, and this is seen with increasing turbidity. So picture this. What was happening was the coagulant was suboptimal. So it wasn't creating coagulation. The aluminium was going into solution, and that was then hitting onto the filters. The filters were then working suboptimally, and then they were passing through the aluminium to the GAC. The GAC was catching that aluminium. When the company came to backwash the GAC, that's where the puff of turbidity was coming from, on the backwash of the GACs. The GACs were becoming unmanageable. The consequent result of that was that the wash water tank was filling up, and the washes were getting shorter and they were becoming less effective. So the turbidity in the filters was going up until there was a point of crisis. And that point of crisis, now there was a blocked coagulant line on the 26th of November. We can't tell because there's no online data of whether that coagulant dose or the absence of that coagulant dose interfered or accelerated the circumstance. Nevertheless, the works collapsed. The circumstance was that the treated water reservoir was going down over that period of time until the point at which there was a loss of supply. Now, when that happened, the company were trying to restart the works, but they couldn't do that, and you heard about trying to get a new coagulant. The opinion of my inspectors is that had they done the appropriate jar testing and had they had the appropriate data, the coagulant chemical, the original coagulant chemical, would have worked. Okay. Now, they have replaced that with a newer coagulant, which is more effective and more efficient, and therefore you would expect that to be to deal with the issue. We asked for the company, we enforced against the notice for the company to put a microfiltration unit after the GAC. That was to stop any residual aluminium bleeding into the clean water tank. Okay, the company have not fitted that to date. We have subsequently put in place an enforcement order for that. We have no further sanction to deal with this. The regulations don't provide us with the adequate facility to do that. The company have used a very rarely used clause within the regulation to allow a boil water notice to happen, which means that the requirements of the regulations fall away because they notify the consumers what they must do to protect themselves, and so do the requirements of SAMD fall away. As a regulator, therefore, we have little path or little options to find that the company has been in breach of the regulations. And that's why I'm speaking more openly to you today, because we don't feel that we have a potential pathway under the current legislation which allows us to sanction the company under sufficiency, because the regulations do not have a sufficiency clause in it. In fact, the company said themselves to my inspectors, when we asked for the water sufficiency planning, that we didn't have the legislative power for it, and initially refused to give us the sufficiency planning for that. They have provided it since. Okay, we have put into place a set of guidance around water sufficiency planning, which we're expecting the water companies to adopt over the next year or 2 years to set those standards more clearly, based upon our risk assessment methodology that we have in place. This event exemplifies the reason of what went wrong and why it went wrong, and the culpability associated with that event and the reasons underneath why that event happened. As I say, I'm more open than I might otherwise have been when we're looking at an event, and I'm very thankful to my team for the hours and hours they spent on site interviewing the process staff there, looking at 1.2 million pieces of data and 50,000 sample results, and the value of DWI as the last line of defence is exemplified in this one event where the public feel that there has to be accountability for where things go wrong. Have I expanded too much?
No, you have. I'm very grateful for your candid response, and actually I think it's incredibly useful, and I'm sorry that the warnings weren't listened to and acted upon. I sense, I'm keen to get your view on this, are you concerned about the likelihood of the incident being repeated?
Yes.
How likely and how soon?
Difficult to say. My team are still working on this. The issue is that that particular site has filters which are 30 years old and undersized. The GAC in the company's own report is undersized. It doesn't have an effective contact bed volume. The site or viewpoint, the ability to oversee that site is lacking, so there's no systems control telemetry associated with the coagulation. It's a manual stroke device. And the site is only manned Monday to Friday during the day. So this site could go wrong overnight and there's nobody there and there's no control room which can see that. We recommended in previous audits that the company should have control of it. We recommended after the 2022, 2023, 2018 that the company should have a system, a response system which takes into the learning. We couldn't find any evidence in our audit of April 2024, our SEMD audit, that learning had been found. We were concerned about it, and we put that in the report. We created 5 recommendations. One of those was to carry out testing and exercising the very things that you were asking this morning about rolling out the response. And we will put that in our report. It won't be pretty reading. That doesn't mean, for instance, all the industry is like that. It doesn't mean that we don't have a fantastic water industry. We do. We have a lot of people who are working very hard to make it right and to provide good quality drinking water, and we're world leading. Let's keep it that way. Let's not let one of the team let us down when we have some fantastic water companies who do their job.
Okay. And the last point, Chair, I just wanted to make was around that response aspect to the incident, because prior to this role I was a county councillor and I sat on the audit committee and we assessed risk, and the probability of risk in this circumstance was incredibly high, which is why I was so surprised of the lack of preparedness to it actually happening. What role do DWI play in that sort of response to an incident and guidance and support that you could provide? And do you think, given that the likelihood of an incident happening, that their response was adequate?
Well, let's go backwards to this question. Was the response adequate? No. Okay, we said that their response wasn't adequate the last time. Okay, and it still wasn't adequate this time. Just go back through your question again.
What role around sort of preventative advice and how you can advise the industry on actually preparing for when these incidents do happen?
Yeah, so as a regulator, we have to be slightly removed, but we do put guidance out in terms of security and emergency measures. There is guidance that sets around how much they should supply, so 1.5% of the population. There is guidance about how much water they should provide, i.e. 10 litres in the first 10 days. We will look at that, so we do provide that guidance to water companies, and our expectation is they follow it. The issue in this instance is that companies don't always follow the guidance. So, for instance, we had companies were under an obligation, South East Water was under obligation to have a risk assessment. They carried out a risk assessment themselves. It was all green. We audited them, and that risk assessment changed after we audited them both for SEMD and water quality. So there was an element of risk normalisation.
Yeah. In both aspects, the advice that you gave around preventing the incident happening completely was ignored, but also it sounds as if your advice on what to do if it were to happen seems to be not acted upon either.
Yes, is the answer.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rink, can I just be clear about this? You've given us a very detailed explanation about the conclusion of your investigations, your inspector's investigations. So the committee now has a clear understanding of that. Had you shared that with South East Water before today?
No, because large parts of the information were from South East Water themselves. They provided their 20-day report to us, which didn't contain much of that. Where that information has come from is from the company's own data. It's come from us visiting their site twice with our inspectors.
Are you satisfied with the level of candour and cooperation you've had from South East Water?
Oh, it's a great question, that.
That's what we do.
Look, we're a tiny organisation, and it takes a huge amount of our resource to respond to such incidents. If you think about it, where I've sent 2 or 3 staff and SAMD 4 staff, we're almost, and where I've had support staff, that's about 10% of my staff to deal with this one incident. Okay. Now, we don't have a huge amount of resource, and there's an expectation that we do more of this. What I would prefer is for the companies to be more open about the information they provide. We shouldn't have had to go out and find that.
Yeah.
Okay.
To be clear, you've joined up the dots. South East Water provided the dots, if I can.
The information was available to them.
Yeah. I'm left feeling that the committee perhaps has been approached today by South East Water with a lack of candour. Tell me in your professional opinion if I'm being unfair to them.
So I think at no point have you been unfair.
Thank you for that. Josh, drinking water quality across the water sector.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you, Marcus, for your time this morning and this afternoon, and thank you for your candour and your responses. I think your evidence is really genuinely going to be very, very useful to us. As you said, against a backdrop of a sector with a lot of problems, the quality of public drinking water has remained consistently high over the years. I think your most recent annual report showed a compliance of 99.97%. And as you said, Britain is a world leader on this. What do you think sits behind that success? What are we getting right on this?
What are we getting right? That's a massive question, okay. How do I condense this down into about 30 seconds? Look, it's a combination of knowledge, skills, expertise. It's a combination of the values that people have within the industry. Honestly, I go into the industry, the people who work in the industry are genuinely great people. They work hard to provide a service. I think there was a comment earlier on about you should never look at the people within industry and deride them or put them down, because they will have spent their Christmases, this Christmas, this new year, trying to get it right, and these people in South East Water will have been trying to get it right as well. So there's a willingness to get it right. I think there is something about our regulatory structure, and I would say the water quality regulation, that we've got this right. Because we have a very clear system of proactive, risk-based, data-led, expert regulation, which drives the company to achieve the standards that we set. We're really clear about it, and as a set of regulators, we are experts. In fact, I would argue that the 2 experts I sent to South East Water were more expert than South East Water experts, because they were able to see the absence of optimisation. In fact, when I spoke to my inspector yesterday, she was animated about the fact that it couldn't be seen. So there's a combination of good regulation, excellent regulators, and companies willing to do the right thing and have the core values. Now, for the majority of companies, that is the case. They want to do the right thing. That doesn't mean you, as a committee, shouldn't exert that pressure. You're absolutely right to be exerting that pressure, whether that be on a company and whether that be on me as a regulator. I welcome being held to account by this. So I think our excellence is part of the system we have here. This accountability, this transparency, but we got it right. But we've got to make sure that we don't take our foot off the pedal, because if we do that, we'll go backwards.
Absolutely. I think it is great to hear that we've got some of the best minds holding the water companies to account and keeping them honest. It is concerning that whether through incompetence or a lack of transparency that you are uncovering, even with a small team, instances where things aren't being done, that rigour isn't there when it should be. And just looking at that other side of the picture, the sort of 0.03 non-compliance, we know that since 2020 there's been an increasing number of water quality events where tap water was likely affected. I think the number of incidents is higher at this point than any time in the last quarter century. So why do you think we're seeing those numbers rise? Are there any trends that you're noticing that we need to be aware of and focus in on?
Okay. Look, if you have an expert regulator who knows what they're doing, really knows what they're doing, you can't push it under the carpet. So, what we do is we rigorously identify from 4 million data points where the risks are, and we go out and find it. So if you go to look for it, you find it. So what you're seeing is a residual outcome of the methodologies that we're using to find where there are shortfalls so that you can't push it under carpet. And that's where the expertise is so important. In terms of number of incidents, the number of incidents doesn't actually reflect the true improvement in the industry. So, for instance, if you look at cryptosporidium, now we've had occurrences of cryptosporidium in recent times, but if you think about it, you can name them where they have occurred. So we've had a recent one which you'll be aware of. Then the last one before that was 2012, 2007, 2005 and whatnot. The number of events of cryptosporidium over the last 2 decades together is less than the number of events in any given year in the 90s, 1 year. Okay? So the progression of the industry has progressed remarkably, but the number of low-level incidents has increased. So it's a bit like health and safety, isn't it? You have the pyramid. So you're getting more reporting further down that pyramid so that you understand. And the reason is the more you understand about those low-level incidents, the more prepared you are to prevent the big incidents. And therefore, whilst we're seeing a rise in those small incidents because we're finding more, you're seeing a reduction in the number of big incidents. So I can count on a number of hands the big incidents that have happened during my time since 2015. One hand I can count those on. Whereas I didn't have enough digits on my fingers and toes in the 90s. So that's the change in methodologies that a regulator uses to interrogate the data, the 4 million pieces of data, the 1.7 million lines of risk assessments that we have. So we expect the companies to do a risk assessment from source to tap and then tell us about it. And then we go, well, there's the risks. Or we then turn around and we go, there's no risks there. So we go off to Tunbridge. Why is there no risks there? Apparently.
Now, obviously, you referred to the fact that not everything is within water companies' control. There could be groundwater contamination, could be a third party involved, but around 45% are within their control. Do you think that's an acceptable level? What more do you think these companies could be doing to control the things that they can control?
Absolutely.
Especially that lower level that you just referred to.
Yeah, so look, the reality is that when I look at the data, you're right, about 30 to 45% are within the company's control. I would say about 25 to 30% are own goals, where the company have, for instance, not optimised the coagulant, for instance, not carried out an appropriate risk assessment. So what our objective is to embed in the companies this risk assessment methodology, and we have been driving this water safety plans. We're well leading in water safety planning risk assessment methodology and the way that we measure it, to peel away the leaves to give us an understanding of how companies could improve. So my inspectors spend a lot of time looking at those risk assessments and proactively then going to the water industry to challenge where the companies could improve and how they could improve those events. So we're driving down the number of bigger incidents.
Do you think those messages are getting through to these water companies? I mean, you've just told us that South East Water certainly carried out risk assessments that weren't really reflective of the reality.
It's a mixed bag. So we have some really good leading companies who really spend time, money and investment. So we see companies who put their hands in their pocket and they put investment in. We've seen some really great innovation, for instance, which is Oak in Severn Trent, where they've literally said, what we're going to do is we're going to use nature-based solutions. We're going to use unused water, such as in the gravel pits, to support resource and resilience. That's brilliant. I quite like that. Other companies, South East Water were a company of our concern, and certainly we had started moving. I had a meeting with the chief executive, and my staff have had a meeting with the chief executive as we were moving them into transformation, because we had previously identified that the company were underperforming, and so we considered that they had gone outside of our limits, our discretionary limits, and we were starting to apply regulatory requirements around notices for them. So they were moving into transformation because they were moving up the risk register quite dramatically, actually. So not all companies really are in the place that they should be. We need to work on those, but we also need the cooperation of companies. We maybe need the cooperation of our administration to help us find the right tools in our toolbox, or add some tools in our toolbox to enable what is a small regulatory team to be even more effective than we are.
What would those tools be? What's going to help you get this best practice out to companies that are not performing well?
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought about this and I wrote this big long list, which I don't think is really going to be helpful. But
you wrote to us with it, it'd be great.
Look, we can supply it afterwards. Look, there are things about regulatory reach, so we can't reach those contractors, third-party contractors. So, for instance, changes in the water market like direct procurement, design, build, operate, we can't touch them. We can't touch the builders, the constructors. We can't touch the water retailers. We can't touch alternative water suppliers, or which provide water which is there for human health. We have a duty of sufficiency and between sources. We have no secondary legislation under that. We would say that we need to do that. We need to make sure that our drinking water sufficiency plan with our drinking water safety plan is embedded within legislation. We don't have the necessary guidance or regulation under alternative water supplies, grey water fittings regulations. We don't have powers to prosecute under SEMD, the powers to fine under SEMD. We don't have the powers of entry to deal with security. Bizarrely, we have powers under water quality, but we don't have powers under security and emergency supplies. The water quality regulations are out of date. The powers, the fines, there's no civil sanctions available. There are no powers, for instance, for DWI to deal with local authorities and private suppliers, which have 1% of the population. The housing regulations, lead I talked about, we haven't got reach around a housing regulation or the grey water systems that are going in to make sure they're putting in safely. Some of the recharging, in terms of the fees we recharge, doesn't give the wide enough scope. Failure to comply with enforcement orders, we don't have scope to deal civilly with that. Provisions to spread and misinformation, such as, for instance, filter manufacturers saying drinking water is lousy when it's not, and then selling their products on the back of misinformation. Action to deal with pollutants such as PFAS, we don't have powers to deal with those. People, fluoridation, we can't enforce against fluoridation or lack of fluoridation or control of fluoridation. That's a matter for the Department of Health. We don't have the ability to define what wholesome is or what domestic purpose is. Drinking water quality, you need it for heating systems. Who thought of that? Okay, clarification on the prosecution lead. For instance, illegal connections. You've got people connecting into the water supply. Dare I say, Clarkson Farm connected into Thames Water as an onward distribution for his pub, with a deal with the local farmer. He did, I understand. Allegedly. It
was in the programme.
It was in the programme. So there are no powers around that. Companies are the regulator for fittings. Would you really? They are a regulator. There's a conflict there, might there not be, particularly if the fittings, if the company decided that there was an issue around that. Look, I can go on.
Can I just say, the committee does its business slightly differently from other committees. Our inquiries never close. So I'm loath to say this because I'm enjoying every second of this. But if you wanted to give us a full detailed note of that, we can certainly take it on and make very good use of it.
My great team at the back there will be happy to follow up on all of those things.
Right.
Can I just pick one final point up? It's something that you mentioned then, Marcus. Obviously, I can tell that you're a man that deals in facts and data, but we know that perception can often be just as important, and really? Public perception of the safety of our drinking water is on a downward trend. Yep. Perhaps it's a symptom of kind of declining trust in general in institutions in this country, but we know that that's happening, and increasing numbers of people are turning to, as you said, bottled water, perhaps with the belief that it's safer, healthier, even has fewer microplastics, we've heard. To what extent do you think that's down to some of those high-profile water incidents that you mentioned, or do you think it's related to other things?
Look, you're right. Okay, so drinking tap water, and let me get this right. I love my tap water, you know, and I will fill up my bottle. And when I go to an airport, I'll find the nearest fill-up point because I have real confidence in tap water. I hate using bottled water. I won't buy it, just on principle. Even if I'm dying of thirst, I won't buy bottled water. Okay, look, it's about confidence and trust. Now, if you have situations where you're being told something and then it turns out to be something else, look, any salesman will tell you, and I'm not a salesman, that it takes ages and ages to gain the confidence to make a sale. And if you make one mistake, that customer will leave on horseback. Okay. The issue is that customers want to leave on horseback, and they can't, and that creates a level of dissatisfaction. The issue therefore, is that companies, people lose trust in the companies. They don't believe what's being said. So there are a whole number of a plethora of issues that are culminating in that. So, for instance, things like storm overflows. So as the data has become more available for storm overflows, people start to understand. There is a greater communication between people to understand that data, citizen science and so on. and people lose confidence and trust. And when you lose confidence and trust, you lose confidence in drinking water. And that's where we are. And then, unfortunately, we have people who take advantage of that. So what we're seeing is a sharp rise in advertisements for under-sink filters, which, honestly, I wouldn't drink from, because you don't know what plastics that's been made from. They're not approved. And yet you have leading celebrities promoting filters. It's shocking. And you see it all the time. So what I would say is that as an industry, we've got to go further. We've really got to work harder, both as administration, regulators, companies, to bring that confidence back. Because when you look at the international figures from Yale and the Environmental Performance Index, we are among half a dozen countries at number one. So why shouldn't people be confident in their tap water? But it's a complex issue. It's a complex issue. And we need to work harder.
I think you're right. In an age where there's more publicly available information on, as you said, things like storm overflows, I think and more misinformation out there as well on social media, there's a question for all of us how we can leverage social media to get the positive story out there that we have very safe, world-leading tap water. And we should be proud of that and confident in that.
We should be proud of it, and we shouldn't let these incidents let us down, because when you look at the South East incident, that was by no means the biggest ever incident. It wasn't a huge incident. It actually should never have happened. Okay? So, when that overtakes everything, then we've kind of lost something, haven't we? Because, when you think about it, the first day I became Chief Inspector, we had Franklaw. Phone rings from the Chief Executive, Steve Marcus, I'm afraid I've got to tell you something. We've got a problem at Franklaw. 670,000 people went on a boil water notice for 6 weeks. Okay? That was my first experience as Chief Inspector. Okay? Luckily, everything else has been a bit more simple since then. But when we're talking about an incident such as South East, that was a relatively small incident. It was big to the people. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Those customers, those businesses were deeply affected. Okay, this was not a trivial incident. Okay, but in the grand scheme of things, it was relatively small, but it should never have happened. And when you have these incidents occurring, then the confidence of the public is lost. So what our owners, it behoves us actually to make sure that we stop these incidents from happening. And part of that is deciding how is climate change affecting these treatment works. It wasn't affecting it in this instance. How is the increase in population? Are the treatment works undersized? Because we have examples of undersized treatment works that need to be dealt with. How do we deal with the abstractions? Because we're losing sight, the balance between abstraction and water supply. So we need to think about how that's done. How do we deal with the expectation of power showers and 140 litres that people are using, most of it which goes down the loo? So why aren't we thinking about catching the rain that falls on our roofs and using it? What about data centres? Why aren't we thinking about where we get the water from there? So one of the things I said is don't think about where the next water treatment works is. Think about where the wastewater treatment works is. Okay, because to deal with the because you can treat that to a standard that's suitable for industry. Why are we sending drinking water to industry? And when we don't need it. So these are all strategic things that we need to be talking about, and that comes within sufficiency and resilience and resources, and we need to join those up together, and we need to think strategically about them over 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And that's what I would encourage, and it's not for me to say, so please excuse me, but I would encourage yourselves perhaps to start thinking about some of those future challenges and strategies.
Marcus, can I just say, I've been a Member of Parliament for 24 and a half years, I've seen some genuine mic drop moments in that time. I don't think I have ever seen a mic dropped in such a calm, measured and professional manner as you have done for the committee this afternoon. I have a sense that maybe you came to the committee keen not just to deal with the issues that we've raised, but also to get the message across that the work of the Drinking Water Inspectorate is important, that it's the part that works, and that should not be lost. We will be closely involved in the scrutiny of next steps in relation to the white paper and the next water bill whenever it comes. Without prejudging anything of my colleagues around the table, I think it's fair to say you've well and truly got that message across.
Thank you.
Thank you for your evidence today. And thank you and to your inspectors for the work that you have done. As behind you, you have a number of residents from Tunbridge Wells who I think will be wanting to demonstrate their gratitude to you and your staff. But for the moment, having demonstrated beyond any measure of doubt my inability to run a committee session to time, we'll just conclude proceedings for today. Thank you for your attendance and for your evidence, and thank my colleagues as well for their forbearance. Order.